Good evening and welcome to the Thursday, January 19th, 2023 meeting of the school committee. I'm going to call the meeting to order and then I would seek a motion to enter into executive session with the reasons that whoever makes the motion can read.
I don't even. All right, I gotta pull up the motion real quick.
Do you want me to read it?
Do you have it in front of you? Okay.
I would like to make a motion to go into executive session pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A1, Purpose 1, to discuss a complaint brought against a public employee, staff member, or individual, and to comply with or act under authority MGL Chapter 30A, Section 21A3, specific to the review of executive session minutes for the meetings of November 9th, 2021, and August 8th, 2022.
Okay, motion by Amanda. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Holly, and we'll do a roll call since we're going into executive session. Holly, we'll start with you.
Yeah.
Jen?
Yes.
Aye.
Amanda? And I am also an aye. And so we are going into executive session at 6:02, and we will return back here for and start our regular meeting at 7 o'clock. Thank you. I don't want to look at your computer if I spill, so I'm moving my soda over here. I won't move. I do. Excellent, thank you. Good evening and welcome back to the Thursday, January 19th, 2023 regular meeting of the school committee. We have just returned from executive session, and at this time I'm going to call the meeting back to order and ask those in attendance if you'd like to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, so it's nice to see everybody here again tonight. Thanks for coming out on a rainy, not so warm night. At this time, it is our public comment period. I assume there probably are a couple people who would like to speak. If somebody would like to come up and speak first, I would invite you. And I know most of you have heard my spiel. We have a 3-minute max per speaker with a 15-minute total public comment period. And then we ask for people to state your name and town of residence for the record, please. So welcome.
Hi. How's everyone tonight? I'm Jen Halliday, 4 Hill Street. I'm also the chair of Hopkinton CPAC. I had hoped to see the final budget proposal before tonight's meeting. I had asked last night at the budget listening session and checked the town website all day hoping that it would be posted, and I didn't see it. CPAC was eager to hear if teachers were going to get anything on their list of critical needs. As a stakeholder, CPAC would like to know, with enough time that we can digest the information and do our duty as an advisory council and offer feedback prior to a vote. Throughout this process, there has been a lack of transparency. CPAC demands to be part of this process going forward, and we're exploring what we need to do as a board to ensure that we are included from now on. 3 new administrators. Why 3? Why not 1 to start? CPAC does not support hiring 3 administrators when we have a shortage of staff and teachers are crying out for help. The movie theater is on fire, I agree. We need to do something bold, I agree again. But we need more firemen, not more fire chiefs. I'm married to a volunteer firefighter, and I've never once seen a fire chief pick up a hose and put out a fire. So CPAC does not support hiring any administrators if money is too tight for more student-facing staff. And I've handed Ms. Kavanaugh a petition with 489 names of community members who support teachers having the support they need to do what is best for our kids. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is there anybody else who would like to speak? Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Jamie Vronka. I live in Hopkinton. This is my daughter Clara. I'm the mother of 2 general education students and 1 special education student. I'm coming forward to thank the school committee for listening to our community appeals for a closer examination of the proposed special education budget cuts. Your volunteer time is truly valuable. Thank you for hearing our concerns, our fears, and the celebration of the talented teachers, educators, and therapists who serve every student in Hopkinton. Thank you for working to ensure equitable access to education for our vulnerable children. As Michael J. Fox has said, the people living with the condition are the experts. Parents and teachers and therapists of special education students are the experts. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak tonight? Thank you. So at this time, Robert, we're going to turn over for the student council report.
All right. So Hopkinton High School is currently having their first in-person talent show since COVID. There are a bunch of creative and funny acts planned, such as songs played on the piano, stand-up comedy, and even an event called speed eating. Tomorrow, a parent coffee is planned by the counseling department. They plan to talk about college admissions and highlight the differences between colleges within the U.S. and colleges abroad. Going into next week, classes are preparing for midterms, which is seen as both intimidating but also a great relief as the senior class realizes that they are nearing the final hardship of their high school careers. That's all.
So am I right? The talent show is going on right now as
Right
we
n-
speak.
yep.
And you are choosing to be here with
No,
us?
I didn't choose. I was forced.
Honesty.
If you need to sneak out to support your fellow students, that's totally fine
It's
too.
unfortunately it's ending. I think
Oh.
soon, but it's on YouTube.
You okay?
So
That's good.
I'll make sure to check it out.
I'm concerned about speed eating.
It's ice cream.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
So choking hazard out the window.
Okay, that's good.
Hopefully not too many of those people will need to go see Mrs. Patterson
Brain
tomorrow.
Hopefully not. Yeah, brain freeze.
Any questions or anything? Always appreciate your updates. So
Love being here.
appreciate that. So that brings us into the superintendent's report, Dr. Kavanaugh.
Okay, thank you. In lieu of the traditional superintendent's report, because it was requested of me, it makes sense to talk about the HCA requested positions from last week. And so we've put something together, I think, that's pretty comprehensive that talks about the HTA requested positions as well as the entire budget process and some of the requested positions from the district and building administrators and where we are sort of standing on all of those things right now. So as I just said, the background is that last week during the public hearing, the HTA had presented a list of additional special education positions that the teachers wanted to see added to the FY24 budget. Hence this presentation tonight. So we'll start out with the current FTE requests, and these are the FTE requests that you have seen repeatedly, week after week after week. So there's not much new here, except there's one small thing that is new. So in student services, you still see that there is 1.4 FTE in teaching, 3.9 FTE paraprofessionals, 3.0 FTE directors of curriculum and instruction. The next one is where you're going to see a slight increase in the budget. It used to say that there would be 0.1 in nursing. We've raised that to 0.4. We've learned from our nursing staff that there are medical needs in the district that warrant increased staffing for next year. 0.6 FTE social worker, 0.8 FTE administrative assistant. In terms of instructional cost for enrollment growth, Marathon, there are 2.3 FTEs, Hopkins, 3.35 FTEs, the middle school 1, the high school 1.2. And Elmwood did not ask for any increased staffing this year, teaching staff. Instructional program enhancements, the middle school 1.0 FTE, high school 1.0 FTE, media specialist, middle school 1.0 FTE, library para reduction. The media specialist is so that we would have sort of a full-time librarian in there. Admin support and facility enhancements, middle school 1.0 FTE, 10-month guidance administrative assistant. At the high school, 1.0 FTE, 12-month guidance assistant. High school, 1.0 FTE, 10-month guidance assistant reduction. So we're sort of trading out a 10-month for 12-month position. Facilities, 1.0 FTE custodian. Technology, 1.0 FTE website manager reduction. So the webmaster position has been eliminated. In all, that is 20.35 FTEs at a total of $1,337,787. So those are the requests that have been on the table, I think, since the start. So when we started to look at make this a little brighter if I can, the HTA requests, the first one was a learning specialist in the Marathon School pre-K. And so if you are creating a new Marathon pre-K classroom, you also have to have paraprofessionals that would go into that classroom. So with the 1.0 FTE at a cost of $72,000, there are also 3 paras, special education paras in the pre-K. That would be 2.7 FTEs in the amount of $103,800. A learning specialist at Marathon, so that's not in the pre-K, that would apply to K and 1, that's a 1.0 FTE, to support high-need students in the amount of $72,000. A BCBA at Marathon, 1.0 FTE, the cost is $72,000, and that is to deal with behavioral needs. Also at Marathon, a special education paraprofessionals totaling 3 FTEs, $85,992, and that's to support the co-teaching classroom. At the Elmwood School, a request of 1 learning specialist to support evaluation needs, again at a cost of $72,000. When you get to the next two items on this list, they're both highlighted in orange, and we highlighted them in orange just to point out that they aren't really special education positions, that when you have an adjustment counselor, that falls into general education, as would a reading specialist or a literacy tutor. So there was a request for an adjustment counselor at Hopkins, 1.0 FTE, $72,000. And in the reading specialist lit tutor, it was hard to discern which one of those two positions was actually being requested. A reading specialist refers to licensure through DESE, and so that is typically a licensed teacher, most often with a master's degree. And then a literacy tutor is someone who works on the paraprofessional salary scale. So I think what the middle school was asking for is to have one literacy tutor at each of the grade levels. And so currently there is one literacy tutor for all three. If you were to put them in and add two, and we went with the paraprofessional cost, for 2 FTEs, it would be about $50,000. And if we take a look at the elementary grades, they don't have a literacy tutor at each one of the grade levels. So the elementary principals, I think, were thinking if that was going to happen for the middle school, they would like that for happening for them as well. At the high school, a request for a learning specialist, and that is to support the intensive students. That would effectively reduce caseloads in the intensive classroom to one teacher for every 5.5 students. And then special education paraprofessional position at the high school, that's technically 2 positions, so 2.0 FTEs in the amount of $57,368. All told, that is 15.7 positions. The cost for those 15.7 positions is about $730,000, and it represents a 1.31% increase over the FY23 budget. These are older slides. I know that you've seen them once along the way, but we did want to point out the sort of historical hiring of special education personnel. And I think before I even start looking at these years historically, what's really important to note is there is a column in each one of those years that says added mid-year. And that's an important thing to note, because even tonight, after a budget is established, and even after annual town meeting in May, when a budget is sealed by the town meeting vote, what typically happens is when we start to recognize that there is a need in special education for any kind of service delivery, whether it's, we need another paraprofessional, we need an intensive teacher, we need whatever the need happens to be, Dr. Zaleski has historically come before this board and asked for an increase in FTE in whatever domain that happened to be. And I don't ever recall the school committee saying that they would not support one of those requests. So as we look at fiscal year 2021, in the mid-year we added 1 ABA paraprofessional and 7 special education paraprofessionals, totaling 8 FTEs. And then when we were developing the budget, we added a pre-K teacher, a 0.5 intensive teacher at Elmwood, a 0.5 moderate teacher at Elmwood, a 0.5 intensive teacher at Marathon, a 0.5 moderate teacher at Hopkins, 1.8 special education and paraprofessionals, and 2.9 ABA paraprofessionals, and a 0.5 school psychologist at Marathon. And adding all of those up, you get to 8.2 FTEs. So if you think about fiscal year 2021, 16.2 FTEs were added to the budget in the domain of special education alone. And if you look at the ones that are highlighted in white, those are ones that are have membership in the HTA. It doesn't just mean that those are the only ones that are student facing, because any of the paraprofessional positions would be as well. So technically all of those are student facing, but the ones that are highlighted in white are the ones that belong to the Hopkinton Teachers Association. In fiscal year 2022, mid-year, we added 1.1 special education para and 1.2 nurses, totaling 2.3 FTEs. And again, that year, during the budget development, we added a 0.5 intensive teacher at Marathon, 3 ABA paras, 1 BCBA, and a 0.4 OT, totaling 0.49 FTEs. So again, you can see that we are at 7.2 FTEs in fiscal year 2022 in special education. In fiscal year 2023, added mid-year 5 ABA paraprofessionals and 1.0 special education para at the high school, totaling 6 paras, FTEs. And then added during budget development, 1.0 intensive teacher in the pre-K, 3 ABA paras in the pre-K, 0.2 speech in the pre-K, and a 1.0 nurse district-wide, 1 ABA para at the high school, and a 0.8 reduction of teacher of the visually impaired. So again, you're at 11.4 FTEs in special education. And then finally, the positions that are slated for 2024. We added mid-year a 0.6 district social worker, and currently she is being funded by a grant, a 0.4 moderate teacher at the high school, a 1.0 special education para at the middle school, a 2.9 ABA para, so almost 3 paras across the district, 1.0 moderate teacher at Hopkins, totaling 5.9 FTEs. And then a 1.0 pre-K director in charge of curriculum and instruction, but also overseeing the pre-K. A 1.0 K-5 director. Those positions are both currently being funded out of a grant, and they started in January of 2023. 1.0 6-12 director. That person does not exist in the district currently. A 0.4 LPN. In the district, and as I said on a previous slide, that one was increased, and then a 0.8 administrative assistant. So what you're seeing there is a 10.1 increase in special education FTEs for FY24. So I also wanted to talk about the budget process, because what happens with the budget process, and you'll see that also in our budget presentation tonight, is that in early September, Mrs. Rothermick will send a launch email to all of the directors and building principals. And in that launch email, she'll say, it's budget season again, and it's time for us to start to think about, you know, what you want to do with your budget development. And then we get a message from our town partners. And this year, the message from the town partners was at 5.1%. So you can imagine that when our building principals and when our directors of technology and HR and student services and all of those people are working, they are really thinking about their own budget within the lens of how do I keep this as close to 5.1% as possible. So some of the things that were asked for that were not filled. At Marathon, there was a request for a 0.5 school adjustment counselor. At Hopkins, a 1.0 general education para. At the middle school, a 1.0 library para. At the middle school, a 0.5 world language teacher. At the middle school, a 1.0 B paraprofessional. At the middle school, a 0.5 adjustment counselor. And a stipend at the middle school for someone to lead the counseling department, because all of those other departments have a CTL or a curriculum teacher leader, and the counseling department does not. At the high school, a request for someone duly certified in ELA and special education to support literacy growth. In the central office, an HR generalist, a 1.0 FTE. In building and grounds, an assistant director to Mr. Person, just due to all of the ongoing construction. In, facilities, a 1.0 custodian to assist with increasing needs. And then central office, there was a webmaster that used to be in the budget that we put in for a reduction. And I can tell you that, Mr. Ghosh understood the reduction, but probably wasn't pleased about it. So there were 9.5 requested positions across the district that were not put into the budget for this year. Had we put them in, it would have been an additional $500,000. And we have, long, I think, and arduous conversations with all of the directors and principals so that they have an understanding of, what is your most important ask and what is it that we need to move our district forward.
Can I just clarify something? 'Cause
Surely.
I think this is the first time I realize this. Out of the director positions, 2 of them are already in the district, right? Which means if they're removed, they lose their jobs. Like if we do
Correct.
not pay, okay, I did not understand that. Thank you.
So here's an interesting slide. So when I was just talking about the things that were asked for by building principals or directors, there are some things that were on the HTA list that were also part of an administrator list. And the 3 that come into that sort of landed in both categories are a learning specialist at Marathon, 1.0 FTE to support high needs students, a BCBA at Marathon, Mrs. DeVoe's request was at 0.5, to help with behavioral needs, and a special education paraprofessional, 3 of them for co-teaching support at Marathon. And so the ones that you see up there right now, when we met with Mrs. DeBow, she and Dr. Zaleski had that conversation as part of the budget process, and there is currently agreement between those 2 administrators that those positions will be included in the FY25 budget. So Mrs. DeBow knows that that's coming to surface tonight. Dr. Zaleski knows it's happening right now. And, we want to be as transparent with the budget process as we possibly can be. All of these conversations take place between, September 9th and when we first come here to present to you on November 10th. So it's a 2-month period, but those budget meetings just keep happening cyclically. And it's not just with Mrs. Rothermick and me and these directors, but it's even between, say Mr. Bishop and all of the SMLs, or other building principals and the SMLs in the areas of art, music, PE, wellness, Dr. Zaleski and building principals, Dr. Zaleski and team chairs, Dr. Zaleski and service providers, Jennifer Suker and the building principals. So all of these people are having all of these smaller meetings as we go through this process, so that by the time we come to mid-November, everyone knows what's on the table, and I think everybody in each building knows what's going on in each other's building as well, or across the district. So if you take a look at this slide, I think it's an important one, because we have to go back to the fact that the town partners charged us with a 5.1% increase. And what we came out with in our very first presentation to you was an increase of 20.35 FTEs, or the equivalent of 20.35 people. The dollar increase for all of that staffing is $4,650,000, and it represents an increase of 8.38%, which is far above the 5.1 that the town asked us to adhere to. Should we add in those HTA requests, that would be an additional 15.7 people at a cost of $729,000, and that would be an additional 1.31%. If we added in the unfulfilled building principal and administrative requests, it would be another 9.5 FTEs, a dollar increase of $510,000, and a percent increase of 0.92%. Overall, if we added in everything that people had asked for, we would be adding 45.6 people to our staffing this year, which, given the fact that our staffing, it would be a fair percent increase. And that would be a dollar increase of nearly $6 million, and that would land at 10.61%, which is more than double what the town had asked us to adhere to. So we've put these together to really show you that a little bit about the budget process and about the needs and the asks, and we know that the needs are there. It's just a matter of being, I think, very thoughtful about what is the most pressing need right now. And I'll give you a good example. When Mr. Lefebvre, our middle school principal, said he could use a 0.5 world language teacher, we asked him, what numbers is that based on? How do you see that staffing playing out? And he said, well, my concern is, what would happen if we had lower Mandarin numbers and I needed more French or Spanish, or we had lower French numbers and I needed more Mandarin or Spanish? I might have to increase in those areas. And we said, yes, we absolutely agree that you might have to increase in those areas, but we don't have that definitively right now. And it seems fiscally irresponsible to say that we would hire somebody at $75,000, $80,000, and naturally it would only be half of that, if we're not exactly sure that that is a pressing need right now. However, when you look at some of the asks on the table, we absolutely know that Mr. Bishop is going to need 1.2 people next year. We absolutely know that. We know that because of numbers. We know that because of interest in programs. I mean, when we look at the kids that we might have to turn away from some of the BTE courses simply because we don't have the staffing, that's unconscionable. We don't want to turn kids away from pursuing what their passions are. And those are how some of those decisions are made. And it's important, I think, for the community to know that.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? I also know that we have Mrs. Birchman here from Appropriations. Do you have any questions you want to come up?
No, I just want to say thank you for pulling this together, because in my 4 years here, I feel like we voted all those positions, but I hadn't pulled all of the history, so it was nice to see that laid out. And I appreciate you walking through the budget process. We live it, but I think it's important for everyone to know.
Yes, and I think everyone knows that it's no real secret that I have worries about our kids who are students on IEPs and even students just identified as high needs. And so I know that these director positions are highly controversial, but I think that when you put the administrator in there, that administrator is truly helping children.
So I have something I want to ask, specifically about the director position. I don't know if it would be better to ask now or after the budget presentation. I'll defer to Nancy. Might be a complicated.
That is a complicated question.
It's a
in terms of,
complicated question that I'm going to ask. So I don't know whether we want to move to the budget presentation, and I can hold all this in my brain.
Can you hold all that in your brain?
I can
Because
hold.
the-
I've been holding it. So it's going to be right. It's right there. It's right there.
Do you have anything specific to these positions?
Not. It's more specific to the budget. I would
Okay.
say.
Okay.
Thanks.
What I do want to say is thank you for providing clarity about the discussions you have with the principals, how you go back and forth, the prioritization, I think a lot of us in corporate America live that, so I don't think I'm surprised to see the negotiations that have to happen and the discussions, but I'm glad that you can talk to the fact that, you know, the building principals are very involved in these decisions and that agreements are made with them as you decide to hold off on something or another that they feel they need.
Yes, and they wanted us to articulate to you too, that there are some things that they would like for their buildings, but they know that it's never getting through the budget process and don't even ask. You know, and that comes in the context of, and you'll see it in the budget presentation tonight, I know I keep showing the high needs slide, but if we go back to the 2009-10 or 10-11 year, about 17% of the kids in Hopkinton were high needs, and then if you look at 15-16, still 17%. But today we are at 30%. And I think the profiles of our kids are changing, and I don't know if that's pandemic related, I don't know if it's demographic, but we have things that we need to start addressing with our kids if we want all of our kids to succeed. And when we say all means all, I think it's important that we act on what we promise.
I have a couple questions. So one is back on the slide that talked about the FY24 asks. There were two columns side by side. That is it. So the 0.4 moderate at the high school and the 1.0 moderate teacher at Hopkins, are they currently in the district?
They are.
Okay,
Yes.
so
we added them after the budget process last year.
Okay,
Yes.
so, and I know some of the answer to this, but just want to kind of highlight it in the thing. In terms of positions that are added mid-year, because it does happen every single year. Some of them I know come over the summer, after the, May, I forget what the date of the town meeting is. And some of them I know come later as needs emerge. If some of these positions, or other positions that are in high needs, emerge or are identified by department heads, some of the directors, and whoever is identifying that we need to be brought forward, and they come to us, what are the funding sources that would be available at that time?
So we look everywhere when we need to bring forward something. As you can see, the social workers being funded through the grant. Sometimes we have teachers who leave at a high level for another job, for whatever reason, we're able to hire at a lower level. So we have attrition savings. So sometimes we're able to just use the attrition savings within the operating budget. So.
Thank you. I'll be totally honest, I knew a lot of that, but I think it's an important piece of the discussion and didn't know how to explain it as eloquently as you did. So the piece here then is, we have a lot of positions out there, both those identified by the HTA and those identified by other administrators, of what potential needs could be coming forward in the district that is difficult to identify. Well, we're probably never going to get 45 new FTEs, but difficult to accommodate everything that we may need going into FY '24. But there, and that's looking at what we're funding right now, but there is some potential that there are some needs that will bubble up here that are more pressing, that would have the potential to be funded of those 45 positions at a later date, if they are not included in today's budget.
Yes, and a lot of times, you can't predict the profile of the child that you're getting. So, imagine that right now at the Marathon Elementary School, 20% of our kids are identified as English learners. What if that number creeps to 30? We'll be here asking for an ESOL teacher. And I mean, that's just an example, but those kinds of things happen all the time.
I also know that as a district, we are fortunate to have some administrators, Dr. Zaleski from one, and I know some others, Mr. LeBrod, I know, who are very aggressive at pursuing grant funding. Might that be some of the positions that didn't make it to tonight? Might some of those be eligible for grants that we don't even know about yet? Is there any?
There's potential. So, the state will roll out either local, state, or federal funding opportunities on really an ongoing basis. Some of them are annual, and we predict them, like our entitlement grants. We know that those are coming. We have a rough idea about how much those are going to be. When Dr. Zaleski is looking at the IDEA grant or others like that, there's some predictability there. And then there are other opportunities. We talked about one a few weeks ago that we're really excited about, what they call a competitive grant. That's not necessarily a guarantee, but if you ask for it and you legitimize why you need it, that will hopefully come your way. So there are those opportunities, but they are certainly not assurances. And of course, it would be dangerous for us to ever plan fully around those. But I think Hopkinton has a strong track record, definitely before my time here, of going after those grants, both large and small, and those small grants do add up.
Mm-hmm. But then those grant-funded positions ultimately have to be built into the budget, so which is why they have to come before us, and we have to vote on them, because we know that, and we always vote usually for special education. I've never seen a request turned down, but we know that we then have to continue to make the case with the town when it gets folded into the operating budget.
And I do think that piece of needing to make a case to the town for those who were able to listening to the budget listening session last night, I do think there may be some of that we may, as the comprehensive town budget comes out, there may be some things that we need to really advocate for if we hope to keep in the budget. Okay, so I think that's all I had from this presentation. We can come back to the budget discussion for others. Okay, so that moves into our school committee chair report. Payroll warrant S23014 and warrants 23-033 and 23-044 have been approved. Copies are also provided in the packets. Liaison reports. Anybody?
We had the ESBC2 meeting. There was yet more design work done. It's really sort of exciting to start to see the student areas and how they're planning the land around the possible buildings. And one of the things that I thought was cool that I hadn't realized until Tuesday was that they have the hallways, and they're calling them like student neighborhoods, and every neighborhood has its own like special need class. So it's incorporated as part of the neighborhood, so even if the kids get pulled out, they're still in the neighborhood with the other kids their age and their classes. I thought that was pretty cool as a physical thing, right? I have no idea what that's going to look like as a program thing, but just as a conceptual physical thing, I thought that was really neat. And then some of the designs have changed pretty significantly. And then they gave us the net zero presentation. So they're looking at the costs of what it would take to have net zero schools and how much it would take to like do the well drilling, to have, geothermal versus air stuff. And that brings me to another point. Normally, I wouldn't announce this in public yet, but I think it's really important in terms of succession planning. I know I'm not running again, and this is a really important committee, and I feel like Jen is
Not running again either.
yeah, so we're gonna need a backup so that they can transition smoothly. Because it's really important that we not throw this over the wall and have somebody just show up and start. So if we can talk about that at some point in the next couple meetings.
To have one of the 3 people who are definitively going to be here
Right,
next year.
to do succession planning, like I said, so, because I think it's too important.
I appreciate that you are, I appreciate that pre-planning too. It is essential work. And I've loved how thorough both of you have brought all this information back to us, and I love hearing your characterization of the work, so I appreciate it.
It's a very cool project to be a part of. I
It's
think
awesome.
it's a very, I mean, it's really, to see it from start to finish
Right.
would be awesome, but I'll watch the last couple of years on each camp.
Will you miss the many meetings though?
Yes, I
You
will.
will.
Yes. I feel like this is our 12
We
and 13.
always get
That's
this
right. Yeah,
cool
it's cool.
drawing.
Yes, exactly.
Every time we
Yeah,
go,
it
we
is
get a
very
new
cool.
drawing, and it's really
What did you think about feasibility of net zero? Like when you listen to that, do you think it is actually like something that is feasible for us to take on at this time?
So one of the things that they brought up is that there is new IRS funding
Oh, interesting.
that may become available. They're not sure how it's going to work yet. They know the money's there. They don't know how it's going to work, and it's like available until 2032, and we're looking at 2026 for building. And we would, once we find out how to do it, we could request it earlier than that.
Yeah.
And it's specifically targeted towards certain things, and geothermal is one of them.
Excellent.
So it might really make geothermal actually the most affordable option.
That's excellent.
Yeah, so
That's
it's
good sustainability
if we
folks
can get
Right,
that,
yeah,
right?
I
Like,
hear it, yeah.
we're still getting mass savings and things like that, but if we can get this IRS stuff, then that makes the geothermal just amazingly approachable, despite the cost of the wells, because right now, well drilling per our partners is really expensive.
Appreciate all the detail. Also appreciate the thought to succession planning. Do also want to highlight that there is no firm commitment should you change your mind.
Thank you,
It,
Nancy.
I believe March 27th is the final day to have your papers in, if you change your mind.
May I add one thing that I think I wrote down in my notes, and one of the members of the ESBC brought up the question, I think it is relevant to the budget discussion tonight. He said, is there a spot in this process where we might start to find ways to save money, given the magnitude of the project, and if we decide to go with the full campus reno, then the magnitude of that project? And so I think it's important to mention that, like, the members of the board are very aware of, from a community perspective, how this is going to impact everyone. And I think when you think about that in partnership with the presentation last night, the budget listening session, that Mr. O'Leary, everybody should watch Mr. O'Leary's presentation. You gotta love a Mr. O'Leary PowerPoint. He does such an excellent job at taking such a municipal finances, like trying to read, Russian and Chinese mixed together. You can't. It's like something that he makes it so that someone who knows nothing about finance can completely understand where he's coming from. And the magnitude of that of all of the projects really were spelled out, and the implications for taxpayers last night were really spelled out. So that's a long way of saying the ESBC2 is really, the members really want to make sure that the impact this project has on taxpayers is as within reason as it can be. And so they're already talking about it, and the project hasn't even been approved yet for spending. So I think it's important for folks to know. It's a big deal, but folks are already trying to find ways to make sure that we make it manageable.
Which I know is greatly appreciated in the larger community as well. There are
Right.
concerns, I think, that many people share about not just bringing on, Elmwood is a large project, but the number of things that
All the capital expenses.
the capital expenses and the debt that the town will be potentially incurring over
Right.
the next few years. So that's all the savings that can be found, I think, are helpful to many of our community members.
Yep.
Anything else for liaison? Did you have a? Okay, so I had CPAC had a presentation from our Director of Social Emotional Learning, Carla Burley, on Tuesday evening. I think that was the week is starting to blend together, which was fabulous, and I know is available it was recorded so that people who were not able to see it will be able to view it. I don't have the link yet, but I know that Dr. Zaleski is going to be sending it out. So that was that, and then just also wanted to highlight and to thank everybody from here who, all the committee was here, and then all the people in the community who attended our listening session on Sunday evening, which was primarily about grade configuration, but we did also field a few budget pieces during that meeting. So also got coverage from the Hopkinton Independent. I don't know if anybody saw that. So.
No, not yet. Okay. I'll look.
That then brings us into the FY24 budget vote, and that is you, Dr. Kaplan.
Thank you. So one more time, the FY24 budget presentation. As you know, our budgetary goals are to approach all of our FY24 budgeting, stressing fiscal responsibility, and I think our last presentation spoke to that, to maintain Hopkinton's exceptional educational and extracurricular programs, to offer curriculum and instruction that meets the needs of all learners, which includes academic, behavioral, mental health, special education, social, emotional, and ESOL needs, to accommodate enrollment growth, and of course to support all of our building principals' school improvement plans. We took a look at this slide before, but I think it's important to restate is that the district really asks our principals and directors to build a zero-based budget. So when they come before us, it's not as if they're just saying, well, this is what I used to have, but the asks really have to be not based just on previous spending, but what's before you now. And so, when we do things like that, sometimes we have a person who is certified to teach both French and Spanish, for example, and last year she taught 4 French and 1 Spanish, and this year she's teaching 2 Spanish and 3 French. And it's nice when you're able to switch a person around like that and kind of reallocate, but those things happen because we really do offer a lot based on student demand. I've already talked about this, but I'll just say a little bit more. So I had alluded before to the fact that Mrs. Rothmick sends a launch letter. She did that last year on September 8th, and on September 29th, the town gave us our budget message. And just so sort of one more time, there are a lot of meetings that go on through those months of September and October. Each administrator does meet with the superintendent and the director of finance. And, while it's a tough role for Mrs. Rothmick and for me, sometimes we have to say that will have to be put off, or that's not, on fire right now. And, I think that our building principals are also respectful of one another, that they really will hear what other buildings need as well. And I'm proud to work with a group of people who are able to do that. So all the budget requests are then amended, and, we are certain moving forward that kids' needs are met. And I think that that's why we come before you originally with like an 8.4 increase and not a 5.1 increase. You know that the administrators presented here on November 10th, 17th, and December 1st, and then on December 8th, we had a joint board meeting, December 15th, January 5th, January 12th, the public hearing, and now again, the budget is being presented. So it's important to know that it happens over 4 months, and it happens with, I think, a lot of talk about it.
Dr. Kavanaugh, can I just add that during that process as well, the school committee has a representative who attends the budget advisory meetings monthly, is that correct?
It's actually been every other week.
Every other week, there we go. More
Or
meetings.
twice a month.
So Nancy's obviously our representative as the chair, but that is with our town partners to continue that dialogue for the whole town with the schools as part of it. And Dr. Kavanaugh, of course, and Ms. Rodmick are there.
And the representatives from the appropriations and from the select board and town manager and director of finance for the town. So
Yes, and that's really how we get to hear about, sort of the big fiscal picture in town, and even sometimes other department needs, so.
and those continue, as you know, from now until really up until May when we vote at annual town meeting.
All right, and once again, I will tell you that we are a little ahead of where our demographer predicted we would be, but it's not as woeful as it has been in the past. At the end of the 23-24 school year, he was predicting 4,160, and we are at 4,184.
One question. I know we see those numbers all the time. That number doesn't include does it include the graduating seniors, or is the number based on the seniors graduating at the end of the year? Like, so is it pre that graduation point?
Yes, so when you look at 23-24, that would, let's imagine that we're talking like May 1st, that would be the group of kids who are sitting in our schools in chairs on May 1st.
Okay.
So preceding graduation.
Thank you.
So, and I can't see all the numbers looking forward, but so we're going to be close to 100 students over at the end of this year over what we were at the end of last year. Is that accurate?
His prediction at the end of this year was 4,078, and we are already at 4,184. Yeah.
So that always, I know that we have to budget conservatively because that's what the town is asking of us, but I do always have concern that we're 100 over this year before the end of the year, how much over will be next year.
Yes.
And we may still get likely some students coming in.
Yes, and sometimes I look at that and I say, so if you have 13 grade levels, or let's even include the pre-K because they are on our list here, so that will take us up to like 15 grade levels. If you have to parcel out 100 students across all of those grade levels, you don't feel a whole lot of pinch. But as Mr. O'Leary says sometimes, it's not linear. So you can absorb X number of kids and, it's kind of great because you keep taking all these kids in, but as he's wont to say, Mrs. Rothermick, Mr. Lebrad, and I, it's not like we're getting raises. It's not like the teachers are getting raises every time a kid moves into district. And so you're absorbing them, and so your per pupil expenditure is sort of technically going down, right? But then at some point you say, oh gosh, we have so many kids in fourth grade right now, that next year in fifth grade, I need 2 more teachers at the Hopkins school. So that's when you have the kind of plateau thing, but now you go up in a lump. And he calls it a lumpy process, and he's right. At some point, there's a tipping point. Yeah. So these are my slides that I think are important for us. And this is where the building principals, and we had a really nice conversation the other day at our administrative council meeting. Before the state was categorizing English learners, students with disabilities, and low-income students as high needs kids, what you would get is you would get this graph right here. You can see high needs is blank, but it was your job. It was kind of incumbent upon you to take those numbers and add them up, the 0.8, the 1.8, 12.7, 1.2, and 0.6. And you could take a look at that and you say, okay, so we'd be in the 17% range, right? And that was in 2010-11. And the 3 categories that feed into sort of that umbrella of high needs are low income, students with disabilities, and English language learners. So then we go to 2015-16, and that's when the state started doing the math for you. So you can see the high needs box, and it's at 17.8. So there was very little change in Hopkinton between 2010 and 2015. Well, when you get to the current year, 22-23, and the state has added up those numbers for us again, you can see that our percentage is at 29.4% of our district is now deemed high needs. And I'll tell you, this is why I think that our whole school district right now feels this sort of angst, right? Oh my gosh, what are we doing is the feeling. Because there are very different profiles of children coming into Hopkinton now. And when you start to see that there are kids whose needs are disparate from what you've known in the past, you say, oh my goodness, how am I going to help that child? And I truly believe that every single one of our paraprofessionals and teachers and related service providers and administrators, everybody wants the very best for these children. And as Mr. Lebride says over and over again, all means all. So when you're at 29.4 and you say, I'm not sure that we have all of the personnel in front of us to help these kids, what it starts to mean is that we do have to start to think about training and scheduling, and of course we're going to put people in student-facing positions, but that's how we're going to get ourselves to this place. I know when I started as superintendent 5 years ago, I said, this is a district of changing demographics, and we're going to reach a point where we feel it. And it's going to feel suffocating, and that's where we are right now. And we've got to find a way to get ourselves into a place where we know how to teach kids with more disparate needs. And that's where I really feel like we are here in 2023. So that's a lot of what we built this budget around. And, you know, I know, Holly, you want to talk about those positions, but at some point the needs become so disparate that a regular old ordinary building principal or Dr. Zaleski can't look and know every single thing that those children need, which is why we're starting with a K-5 and a 6-12 directive, because when the needs are identified, you have a better shot at putting the right person into the position to help. So for example, if we say it's behavioral, and so what we need is somebody to really get us another BCBA in there, or if we say, oh my gosh, we are seeing a whole lot of, you know, bias and racism in our schools, then we take Carla Burley and we deploy her to doing like something like the HSA survey to find out, you know, what's kind of, you know, going on with our kids, or Jen Suker to do that kind of a survey and say, do we have problems with racism and how do we best address that? Like, we've been working with consultants now, we've been working with Blackprint to get in there and make sure that those kinds of slurs are in reduction. I don't know that you can ever say that you're going to eliminate them, but we have a lot of very unique needs now, and so, you know, I don't think we can just say that there's a specific fit. We have to analyze the fit to know what the professional looks like that is the best fit to target that particular issue in our schools. And there are issues. We can't put our heads in the sand and pretend that they're not. Is Hopkinton still an exceptional high-performing district? Of course we are. But we have to make sure that we're watching closely who we are all the time. And I mean, I think that that's my job, and I hope that that's, you know, what you see my job to be as well. So I will let Mrs. Rothermick take over from here and have that conversation about the things that have gone into the budget.
Okay, thank you. So again, from the FY23 net operating budget of $55,522,000, this budget represents a salary increase of $3,169,000, or 5.7%. An expense increase of $1,480,000, or 2.7%, for a total increase of $4,650,000, or 8.4%. And that is with the change of the additional 0.3 in nursing. So this number, $60,172,752, is different than what's in your agenda, because that change happened just before this meeting.
And it pushed us up to 8.4.
8.4.
Yes.
That 0.3 is gone.
Yes.
Yes.
It's 8.38, so
Okay.
roughly 8.4. Carol, next slide.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. And just as a reminder, we do use the revolving accounts to offset the budget. So there's an increased use in the revolving accounts that you have right now of $498,000. And we also have a special education reserve that was created last year, and we anticipate full use of that, and we would need that full refunding again for next year. So when you add those together, the $60,172,752 plus the revolving plus the special education reserve, the gross operating budget for the school district is $63,963,322. Looking at just the salaries, contractual obligations represent $1,831,000, staff requests $1,337,000. Moving into those specific requests, for student services represents 10.1 FTEs, an increase of $662,000. That is 1.4 in teaching, 3.9 in paraprofessionals, 3.0 Director of Curriculum and Instruction, and I highlighted the 0.4, which was 0.1 of nursing, now is 0.4, 0.6 social worker, 0.8 admin assistant. Instructional cost and enrollment growth, 7.85 FTEs, 492,000. That's Marathon 2.3, Hopkins 3.35, middle school 1, and high school 1.2, all teaching. Instructional program enhancements, a 1.0, which is 119,000. That is middle school 1 and high school 1, media specialist. Middle school has a library para reduction. Administrative support and facility enhancements, 1.4, $63,000. Middle school, 10-month guidance admin assistant. High school, 12-month guidance admin assistant. High school, 10-month guidance admin assistant reduction. Facilities, 1 custodian. Technology, 1 website manager reduction. Again, total staff requests of 20.35 for $1,337,000. For expenses, the increase is $1,480,576. Using those same buckets within contractual inflation and current services, transportation increase of $179,000, that is a new transportation contract. Utilities increase of $284,000. These represent new electric and gas rates, and these have already been offset by an estimated solar of $102,000. Athletics, transportation estimate, and pool rental due to the loss of the Keith Tech pool, an increase of $63,000, and miscellaneous regular education of $72,000, technology of $36,000, and miscellaneous others. The next buckets, student services, $669,000 increase. That is from $615,000 in transportation, $49,000 in tuitions, which reflect a 14% rate increase on private schools. Miscellaneous other increases offset with the use of $1,156,000 in circuit breaker. Instructional cost enrollment growth, $187,000. Transportation will be adding an additional bus at a cost of $78,000 and new technology leases at $109,000. Administrative support and facilities, we are reducing extraordinary maintenance by $20,000. Pulling the buckets together, both salary and expenses, the contractual inflation and current services is $2,475,000. Special education, $1,332,000, again 10.1 FTEs. Instructional cost enrollment growth, $680,000, 7.85 FTEs. Instructional program enhancements, $119,000, 1 FTE. Administrative support, facility enhancements, $42,000, 1.4 FTEs. Again, $4,650,000, 347 increase. Looking at those same buckets in terms of where those percentages land for your contractual inflation and current services, that represents 4.5%. Special education, 2.4%. Instructional cost and enrollment growth at 1.2%, program enhancements at 0.2%, and administrative support at 0.1%. And again, the total increase is 8.4%.
Oops, I'm not sure. Did I? Am I on a different?
Nope, I put these in.
Oh, sorry. I didn't know they were coming.
So I just want to circle back. That's the presentation that you have seen many times. But circling back to what Dr. Kavanaugh had talked about in her superintendent report, these were the HTA requests, additional 15.7 FTEs at a cost of $729,000 or 1.31 increase. The administrative request that did not move forward was 9.5 FTEs, another 510,000, which would be another 0.92 increase over the FY23 budget. And then lastly, bring this all together in terms of our budget guidance was 5.1% that was given to us in September. That represents a dollar increase of $2,831,643. The budget that has been presented several times is the 20.35 FTEs, represents a dollar increase of $4,650,000, and that is 8.38%. Adding in additional requests for the HTA request would be an additional 1.31%. The unfilled building principal administrative would be another 0.92%, which would run up to a total of 10.61%. Now, as you can see from the previous slide, the 5.1% guidance, and we are at 8.4. So some of the things that we did last year, we did increase our use of revolving accounts. So knowing in our meetings with our town partners, as they are trying to solve townwide the budget gap, if you will, we went back and looked at the revolving accounts. There is an opportunity to add an additional $280,000. You can see the revolving accounts highlighted in orange. That could increase, and you can see the forecast year that this increase can hold until. So most can hold until fiscal 30 before you would have to reduce. So you have a number of years without creating a cliff in the funding. The one bus revolving, the change would be in FY29, and international tuition is most aggressive, and that change would have to happen in fiscal year 27. So there is an opportunity for that. The other strategy that we are doing with the building principals and directors is we are looking for anything within the budget that is a one-time purchase. For instance, if they needed new science tables, there's an opportunity to potentially pull those out and have them funded by free cash and not be part of a recurring budget. So, but we're working with the town, trying to solve, again, that budget gap with the 8.4%.
So, just to be clear, in my previous life as Board of Assessor person, we are only allowed to raise taxes by a maximum of 2.5% and then new growth, right? So that means that with the amount that we have here, if it all stays the same and we don't get the state funding, which we know we will get, but if it were at this point, we would be looking at an override, right? So there would have to be a vote by the town to say, we're gonna pay more in taxes in order to be able to cover the budget as it is right now, which is what is giving our town partners such concern.
I don't believe we've had an override since 2006.
We've had 2 underrides since I've been here, but we have not had an override.
Not since 2006, I think.
So just, I mean, just laying it out there as, you know, that is part of what causes a lot of concern is the limits to taxes, which is smart because we do have elderly and we do have people who have lived their whole lives, and if the taxes go up significantly, now they can't live here anymore. So there's a large balance that the select board has to take.
We've also heard from some families with concerns about the size of our budget.
Yeah. So
Mr. Kamala did seem optimistic. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but last night he did seem positive about how things are proceeding, which is a testament to you all. But I think also he seemed positive about about being able to make this work without an override. Now, you know, again,
right.
He didn't
Fingers
say that
crossed.
exactly.
No.
He just seemed very optimistic that this is going to be okay. So, I'm sure that just means 4,000 more meetings for you between now and May. But but, or the budget advisory committee, but it did seem like there were
Right.
opportunities to make,
And that's why
this
I'm
work.
saying, we know we're still getting the
Right.
state funding. We know, we know there's things that are going to happen that will help us. But just at this point in time,
Right.
with what is
Yes.
in front of us.
right, you're right.
And it's hard to know if there would potentially be an increase in state funding under a new governor or,
Right.
unknowns that we can't use as part of budgeting right now. But I agree, he did seem positive. I know that the comprehensive budget, which will include funding sources as well as the town manager's recommended full town, including us, budget, is going to come out either next week or the week after, because it will go, we did commit to voting on it tonight and submitting it tomorrow morning for the town to be able to include in their process. But so will shortly come out and give us a better sense, and everybody in town a better sense of where things stand in terms of the town's ability to fund the budget and how big the budget will be.
Right.
Are we able to talk, I do not want to interrupt Susan's presentation, which
I'm all done.
I don't know if anybody has said this before, but you are very, very good at making this like palatable and understandable. Because it is a $60 million budget, and I've worked for companies where I've looked at them and I'm like, absolutely, I'm not reading this. This is terrible. But this is incredible, and I appreciate it. It's a very unique and wonderful skill set you have. So, thank you. And I wanted to. I wasn't here last week. I got to watch the meeting. I want to thank everybody, both on this board and that sat in the audience, because it was a lot of like really important conversations, and I think the whole board is in agreement that we need to have a discussion about this process and how it looks moving forward. And I had a couple things I wanted to put into the universe, and then something more specific. Well, one, I was hoping that a like offshoot of this would be a formalized CPAC policy and how we engage with the CPAC organization. I think that our relationship with CPAC should be formalized, and that we should be mindful of how we are engaging with, a state mandated government like group that has more knowledge than any one of us combined or together, because they are the parents of the children that we are elected to take care of, right? Our most vulnerable members of our community. And I think that it's an important part. I know a lot of our neighboring districts have them. I think we can take a look at what they did, but it seems like a great idea to really say, like, we value you and your presence in our community, and we want to work with you collaboratively. And another thing that kind of came up from watching last week and thinking about the whole process was having a teacher forum. I mentioned this at the beginning of the process. I still think it's valuable. We heard from a lot of teachers, but it seemed like it was kind of teachers that felt like they had no other outlet. And I think if we make a formalized process to listen to feedback from the teachers, and I am the least tenured on the group, and I'm very happy to listen to everybody else's thoughts on sustainability, feasibility, all of that. Transparency with our data and reports. I feel like there should be things that we may need to discuss. Maybe it's a policy, maybe it's a best practice, how we disseminate information that is essentially taxpayer funded, whether it be a consultant report or data on our students, obviously de-identified and compliant with FERPA. And I think the most essential part I wanted to talk about was these curriculum directors. When I kind of, I'm not a cool person, I don't do cool things. I read a lot of the Mass General Law that oversees school committees, and it seems that we are at a point with the growth in our district where we are kind of underneath the MGL Title 12, Chapter 71B, Section 3A, where we are over 4,000 students, and it kind of mandates that we have a dedicated special education director. Like, now we are kind of out of compliance with that law. It didn't give specific information about a grace period. I actually have I'm going to be a founding father for a minute, and I get to read the actual, I got this from Georgette. Thank you, Georgette. This is, so it says, a school committee with 4,000 or more children enrolled in the school system shall appoint a person to be its administrator of special education. Such administrator shall devote full time to the duties involved in supervising the provision of all special education in the school system. So while we were at less than 4,000, it was not a state mandate. Now that we are at 4,000, it seems like it is a state mandate, and it needs to be. When I think about the 3 directors that are proposed, I have never been like, I don't really have not found a justification for them while our special education department is telling us they're understaffed. So I think that, I don't know whether this is not something that I've heard mentioned before. I'm interested to know what the information that everybody else on the board has about this and how they feel about it. Personally, at this juncture, I would love to take, whether or not it's feasible is a completely different story, to take the money that we have allotted for the directors and try to get more student-facing staff. Whether that can be done, I don't know, but I'm a person that is very, and I think this is clear from all of the discussions that I've been a part of. I am very, very aware of the job that the teachers do within special education and the difficulty of that job and the rising needs of our student population that we've seen time and time again. So if I can give them, or I can be a part of a discussion to give them more backup, more support, I would love to do that. So I'm going to stop talking now and listen to my peers.
Can I just, because you did bring up something that has been discussed with regards to the 4,000, that I've heard that before.
Yes,
I don't know if Dr. Zaleski, if you would be able to explain a little bit of, I know that your knowledge of the laws is great, and how the directors that have been proposed might fit into that, or whether if we're likely to face a compliance issue down the road.
Sure, thank you. So the law that you're quoting is the general law for special education. So I, in my role, are serving in that capacity as the Director of Student Services. So the district, during my tenure and the tenure before, has always been in compliance with that regulation. Because you need 4,001, you have to have a certified special education administrator intact. So the positions that we're proposing honestly have nothing to do with that regulation.
Right.
We're already in compliance with that. The positions that we're proposing are the magnitude of what we're dealing with, and you heard in Dr. Kavanaugh's presentations, and the numbers of children that we're serving, the varying profiles, also the initiatives, and when you look at our curriculum instruction and assessment, the management and oversight of that within special education specific. It's critical. So we have a lot of work to do, and those positions are going to help us in those efforts.
To really ensure high-quality teaching
Well, it
environment.
is.
But I also want to point out that in Dr. Zaleski's role, she does oversee 504s and guidance services as well.
Well, correct.
My question wasn't a commentary on Dr. Zaleski and her work. The law says devotes full time to special education, and your job is kind of multifaceted. You do not only see over special education.
Correct.
So it's in my reading of the law, and I have a friend who works in educational law. Her reading of the law was we would need a staff member, a director that only devotes their time to special education. And if that is not how the law should be read, I'd be interested in hearing about that.
Well, certainly I'm not an attorney, but I will say you have to have a special education administrator intact that's overseeing special education. There isn't anything in the law that I'm aware of, and again, I'm not an attorney, that says you can't have a director of student services that is doing both special education as well as student service work. If we were under 4,000, there's many things I could be doing on top of what I'm doing, but the law is specific in insisting that you have a certified person overseeing special education, which I do, but I've never seen any specificity in the law stating that I couldn't do more than that.
But it kind of does. It kind of,
Right.
under 4,000, it's like the role of special education can also have other duties. It kind of expressly says somebody who is devoted full-time to special education. And I read that as their only job is special education.
Right. Again, I'm not a special education attorney,
Right.
but my knowledge when going into this field and becoming properly licensed to do the position and having been a special education administrator for over a decade, I do know that the district is required to have a certified person in the role to manage those duties. But above and beyond that, in terms of the specificity of the regulation, again, I'm not an attorney, but I do know that you can be.
We'd be happy to
more.
check with our legal counsel.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be the most, beneficial thing to do if you want the exact answer in terms of the reading of the regulation.
Right.
But the district's not out of compliance, so I just want to make that clear. Like,
Well, I wouldn't assume that immediately at 4,000, we're supposed
Right.
to have this person magically appear. Like, obviously, this is something, our growth just hit 4,000 within the last year, so.
Correct.
It was something that I have not yet heard discussed, and it seems like there is a difference between districts under 4,000 and over 4,000. And I wanted to ensure that if we need to change the way that we manage special ed, that we can do it. And I don't know what that looks like, and it is really not anything to do with you. It's more to do with ensuring the district is complying with the law.
No, and I just, for clarity, I didn't take it personal. I'm just trying to flesh out my role versus the regulation.
Yeah.
And then how we're ensuring compliance in the district.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm going to ask a question as a follow-on to that. If it turns out that we are going to need a special education director in addition and separate from the position that you serve because our district has, is that something that either the K-5 or the 6-12 directors that are proposed in the budget would be able to, or be licensed to, or have the ability to kind of share or do that role?
So the answer is tricky.
Okay.
So we're hiring these positions to oversee curriculum instruction and assessment specifically. So these positions are in buildings, in classrooms with, in the teaching and learning environment. And in the K-5 director position, for instance, that person is a certified special education administrator. So if you wanted to move that person into a special education director specific only role, you certainly could do that. But then what's going to happen is what's happening in my role is the person's not going to be in classrooms on a constant basis looking at curriculum instruction and assessment and data. That person is going to be sharing the duties with me around regulation, the high profile cases that we're managing and handling, day-to-day operations and things that come up, the budgetary process. There's a lot of aspects of what I'm doing. That person would be pulled in different directions. So what would be tricky is we would just be back to a situation where curriculum instruction assessment is not getting the attention that it needs. Could that person do it? Sure. I mean, as long as they're a certified special education administrator, absolutely. We could certainly move a person into that role if the person wanted to apply for that role too. But we designate these roles very specific for curriculum instruction assessment because of our high expectations and also where we're at with our data to make sure that the students are getting high quality teaching and learning.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thank
being
you.
here and coming up and being able to address some of that.
And thank you. Thank you all for listening.
Other questions or comments related either for Dr. Zaleski or for Mrs. Rodman or Dr. Kavanaugh regarding the budget as a whole?
I don't think I have any specific questions. I mean, we've seen it so many times. The one thing that I wanted to point out that I think is important is the monies allocated on one of the slides for, I have to get the term right, hold on, I'm gonna pull my notes back up, instructional program enhancements.
Zero?
Yeah.
The one that's zeroed out.
The one that says zero.
There we go.
And I think that that's very telling also to the tightness of this budget. Because that's general education in my interpretation. Do I have that wrong?
You are correct.
Okay, so we are spending nothing on it this year in the interest of presenting a fiscally responsible budget that includes everything that the district determines we need. And that's a hard thing to see if you're a general education teacher. You're getting nothing. They're going to continue to work with what they already have and do the amazing things that they've been doing, no doubt, but they are not being given additional resources next year for the nearly 3,000 plus general education students. So I think that's also important to remember. When we talk about all means all, we are doing what we can for all the kids with what we have. Yeah, the zero stood out to me.
We're addressing growth. I mean, the growth is the one before.
Yeah, not to
you're absolutely
imply
right,
that
the
it's
zero.
not right,
The
but
zero's
but
stark.
there's nothing. They're not getting anything this year.
Right.
They're working with what they already have.
Okay.
Even though we have 120. How many new kids? What was the number? I forgot. I didn't write that number down. But whatever that number is.
120 now, yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
120 new students. So and perhaps not all of those 120 students would fall under the umbrella of general education. They may receive services, but still, even if we take the 13%, that's quite a few kids, 70-ish, plus or minus kids, for whom we're working with what we've got and not adding to provide for their education. So I think it's important that we see the big picture. Is that right? Got the numbers wrong? There's a conversation.
I was just going to say, I want to make sure that you're absolutely right, Jen, about that. But when the way it will look on the ground might look a little bit different than how we're discussing. I think that's important to, one of the things we do in our carefully thought out budget, especially in the curriculum and instruction area, is there is some maintenance that maintains our quality programming that does include some new. So, one, for instance, is that there's a need for the replacement of social studies textbooks at grade 3. And so next year, assuming that it's approved, we will put a brand new set of social studies textbooks in front of all of our third grade students, teacher resources that go along with it, online components as well. So there is new, but it's a little bit of semantics because it's not really an enhancement, it really is maintenance,
Right.
but it is new. So I would feel disingenuous if I didn't offer that, but the spirit of what you're saying is correct.
Okay, thanks.
And so something like that would be in that replacement bucket
Fair enough.
as opposed to where you
An
see
enhancement.
program enhancement.
Yeah, it's a better product,
Yeah.
yes.
Right.
But to build on that, I mean, essentially, we would consider that really it's really non-discretionary. Like, it's either growth or end of life or, replacement. That 187,899 is really non-discretionary. When, when Leah, you talk about what is our technical programming looking like and how are we equipping people for the jobs? We are doing a lot with grant money. Thank goodness for grant money, and a lot of the more adventurous programming that we do. But at some point, that zero can't stay.
Right.
Like, we are going to have to address that zero for the other. If it's 13, so the other 87% of the students for whom we're not really doing any new investment in terms of new programming outside of grant funded. Again, we do quite a lot with our grant money. We have a lot of generous sources of money, but still, I do
Our
It
wonderful
jumped out.
dissection table.
Our,
that
right,
we
our,
got, like,
that
was
is
That's
homage.
amazing.
Oh, yes,
Yes.
exactly.
And we really should have that sort of shout out to, the community organizations that help us
That
with those
help
things
us,
because
yeah.
they've done amazing things for us.
And the other things that you've just heard, just to finish that thought recently, I mean, in another sense, the partnerships with business and looking at more CVTE types of education, that's sort of new programming. It's not just all about any one kind of career path. And we get by creatively, offering really great programs, but we're not splurging.
Right. And it's a testament to the administrators and the teachers and everybody who's involved in that grant process. So, I mean, you're right. I don't mean to be Debbie Downer here, but I think that zero really
No, it
jumped
really
out at me
does. That makes
as
such a
being
point.
very meaningful to the budget process
Your
as a whole.
perspective is invaluable on this. Like, I don't look at that and think like, no. Well, I feel, I do, I think that. When I looked at it, I was like, that seemed like a bummer, but I didn't think about it from a teacher's perspective. Like, we are not getting like the new cool stuff, right? Like,
Right.
we're kind
Unless it's a grant, right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
right, yeah. Thank you for that.
So, formalized CPAC policy, yes.
Right.
I completely agree. I think that was a large part of what currently happened. I think we need to have it clarified. No question. I really like that idea. The teacher forum, you know, I think so. I think for a couple reasons. You know, I think by giving teachers a space to talk to us about what they think, right, just like our listening sessions, then we can also create the space for parents to talk to us about what they think, and so we can get the groups, we can hear more from the groups. I think that's a really great idea. In terms of the directors, I'm so on the fence on this. I think that I have to default to believing that the people who have created this amazing program across our school district probably know what they need in order to make it work. Like, you know, I'm not, like, it's a different, so thinking about it from a work perspective, right? Like, I just, as of today, I guess, I just became president of the employee resource group that deals with Latinos in a 35,000 employee company, right? Thank you. But the point is, when I'm sitting, I'm thinking globally about, okay, how can I address my hourly workers and figure out what I can do to convince people to help them versus helping getting more engineering people in, right? I'm thinking at this very broad level that somebody who is an individual, right, working as a individual contributor inside of the company doesn't see all of that, right? And having been an individual contributor, I can say I didn't see all of that. Like as I've moved up and I start to go, oh, look at that balance I'm having to play out here, you know, and then you move up further a little bit and you're like, you know, I was complaining about this and it really seemed like, oh my God, no one's thinking of that. But when I got to this level, then it was like, oh wait, the balance is there. I may not have heard it. Maybe there was a transparency problem. Maybe it should have been clearer. But so I have a hard time sometimes, like, looking at this and, you know, I get it. I get that we need people in the ground, but I also have to trust up to a point that the people who are at the macro view level are thinking and have thoughts, information, patterns across the school district that they're looking at, that they're making decisions based off of. So that's why the director position is one of those that I really have a hard time going against, because I feel like I don't know all these macro things that they may be seeing as a systemic thing across the entire school district, right? And all of the pressures and things with the building principals and the, right? Like, I don't know all that, right? So that's why I'm pro the director positions, because I feel like I have to trust that the macro view is happening, and it is, because we're doing so well and because our school district is ending up in the top, right? Like,
Well, that's for general education, right? our special education, what we saw from the MCAS data, a large chunk of our special ed kiddos are struggling, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But our special education lead is saying part of the reason she thinks that's happening has something to do with the curriculum oversight at this kind of macro level, right? And
Right.
so
I struggle with, the abundance of feedback we've heard from our teaching staff, right? Like that are in the room with the kiddos, right?
Right.
So, it's a deep trench that has not been bridged for me, right? And I wish that we had been able to have those kinds of conversations. Like what is missing in the middle, right?
Right.
Because I think there's something missing in the middle that either we don't understand or is being miscommunicated between the sides, one way or the other. And so I really, you're a data person, I'm a data person.
Right, and I'm not trying to convince
No,
you.
I
I'm just
don't
trying
think
to
you
say
are.
that
I
this
very
is-
much appreciate your perspective.
Yeah, that's
And,
fine.
you're a person that I am happy to listen to, and so just like every person on the board, I think.
And I think you're right. You're right that this is hard.
Yeah.
This is hard. You want to get those people on the ground. You want.
I want to get it right. I don't
Right,
care.
exactly.
I don't care if I'm completely
Exactly.
wrong. I don't care if I'm right. I want to get it right, and I want to get it
Exactly.
right for the kids.
Right,
That's the only
exactly.
thing. That's my only focus.
Exactly. Totally agree.
Thank you.
So that's me. First of all, the CPAC conversations, I absolutely agree with that. I do remember being alarmed, was it 2 years ago now or 3, that when we didn't have the same CPAC presence and organization with full board and everything that we have today. And I think we talked about how do we help? Because CPAC is an important tool. I don't want to say tool, but an important, stakeholder. Thank you, for school committee as well as for the administration. So I think we had reached out and invited the CPAC then president here to say, how can we help? How can we get the word out? How can we get a board in place? What can we do? Like, well, how are things going? And so I'm thrilled that under the current leadership, things have really formed. I think that's great. It's good for the district. It's good for everybody. It's good for the students and the process. So that said, we're all figuring out. We're coming out of a pandemic. We sort of have new people in place, and we need to look at process because I think there are some improvements for how we all work together. So I definitely welcome the idea of having those conversations with the board and figuring out a way to go forward. I think there are things that we could all do differently that we learn as we go. So love that idea. I'm thankful for you for raising the Mass General Law position. I've said before, I do, for many of the reasons that Lee articulately stated, I am in favor of the director positions because I have almost never heard a lot of requests for director positions, and knowing when I see some of the trade-offs, knowing, for example, Mr. Person, we're in the middle of expanding campus in every possible way between Marathon and ESBC2 and all the engineering studies for all the buildings. We have one person, and Ms. Rothermick, running you ragged. Like the idea that we need an assistant buildings and grounds director makes complete sense given the trajectory of growth and the fact that we said no because we had to. And the choice was looking across everything, looking across all the other needs that we said no to. The people who know a lot more than I do were able to look at all of that, talk to all the people in the food chain, and come up with a district agreement, because it is the whole administrative team. And I know that Dr. Kavanaugh meets with the full administrative team weekly or frequently.
Every week.
And it's a team decision on behalf of the students. So I don't know that I can interject clearer information you know, from where I sit, I have to, with those director positions, defer to you both, because and the people who are under you, because I think what I hear you saying, and I've heard this from parents and teachers as well, that, you know, curriculum modifications, you know, stuff that we can do to support the teachers. Like, I think I see the director role as being supportive of the teachers in the classroom, and then coming back to us next year with the budget. We already know you've earmarked a few of the requests for next year that I didn't know, so it's good to know that those are on the docket. But, you know, what else will they see? And with those positions and with those eyes working collaboratively with the teachers, I feel like we are going to be in a really good place. So that's why I'm in favor of the directors. I am a little nervous now that we need one who is the SPED director. So I would definitely be interested in what our legal counsel can provide in terms of guidance. If we have 3 dedicated directors parceled out by grade range, can that be the equivalent or better than one? I'm assuming logically it can, but I would love to get legal endorsement for that plan.
I want to clarify about meeting with the administrative team. Twice a month, the entire team comes together, but every week I meet with each individual principal on a given day.
Thank you. So I'm personally hopeful that this is going to be for the good of everybody, the teachers, the students, you know, that we're going to get a better product and a better experience for everybody. Communication, I'm thinking parent communication could be maybe improved. I think a lot of things that maybe operationally or systemically just haven't had the eyes, because we have one director of student services and a very big department. We just haven't been able to maybe get at everything. So I'm very hopeful, and I'm supportive of the director positions. I did want to, the listening sessions. You mentioned the teacher forums. I don't know how to go about that. I'm gonna internalize that as something we should think about, because I know there are a lot of factors. There is the reality of the union and how, you know, what our roles and responsibilities are, what we are allowed to do and not do as school committee members, and so I want to think about that and figure out how we can get at that. I will say that there were some teachers who attended our listening session, and it was really nice to hear from them, and those are open. So, you know, also obviously all the public comment, but you know, the ability to hear from teachers is great. I don't know how we do it and do it in a way that it can be back and forth. Like, I just don't know enough yet myself about what's permissible, but I'm glad you raised it. So I thank you both all for the budget, the changes that were made, the history, the process explanation. I'm in favor of it as you've presented it tonight.
Thank you. So I guess I'm going to pick up, as others did, first with the CPAC policy. I do love that idea. I love that it gives us the potential that not just to meet where the law is at and what our legal obligation is, but to make an intentional relationship formalized, not just that we have a CPAC, but how we work with a CPAC and how we can maximize the collective voices of the CPAC. They represent, you know, all of our kids with disabilities. That is in the district. That's some of our kids as well. And there's a lot of collective wisdom there that we could learn how to work differently work with the CPAC to get some feedback on how that would look going forward. I also want to say that just this process, and I think I'm guessing most of you feel the same way, has been really very challenging in terms of we've heard so much feedback, so much angst in the community. Personally, I imagine you guys feel the same way. I love our teachers. I love our special educators. They have made significant impacts on my kids. I would love to add all 45 positions that were up there.
We would too.
But in all seriousness, when we hear asks coming forward, it's compelling. It's compelling to hear the people that are, you know, working directly with our kids, what their thoughts are. It's compelling to hear what the administrators wanted, and there are probably town partners who are putting their thumbs down at me right now, but if we had the ability to fund it all, that would be where I would go. I also was very swayed back in August by the vision of having directors for curriculum and instruction and the ability to get in the classrooms and give assistance to the teachers and kind of analyze where we're going forward. I know that we do have the K-5 one in place as of this month. My hope would be that some of these asks that we've seen already might resonate with what they're seeing in the classroom, that we'd be able to look at some of the ability we have down the line post when we submit this budget to find ways that we, as needs are kind of the total number, maybe we can't add in, but there might be things that come back to us. I think, Amanda, you said it, that we have never, in my recollection, declined a special education request that you have brought forward. But that would be, a hope of mine. I like the analysis of the use of our revolving funds, and I think, that might be something that we lean on down the road, the increase, because am I understanding correctly, we are not going past what the higher number was in terms of the use of the revolving. We've gone up over the past, it's 2 years that we've increased, or was it just the 1 year?
We increased significantly last year, and there's a little room to increase, but it can be something that you save for another meeting.
I would like to save that for another meeting, but I would like to, in fact, I'd like to save it for not anything in the next couple months, but something that we're able to use to fund things that are emergent, and it kind of to be able to meet needs that we maybe don't have the ability to kind of dismember our budget right now on the fly, not on the fly, but like right here at the table, and look and see what we might need in a few months.
Once the school committee votes their budget, and as you said, it will go into a packet for the select board that will be presented on Tuesday. And currently, the budget is not funded. There is a gap. So even with the 8.4, if that's the budget that you vote tonight, the budget will have a gap next week, and we'll continue to work together with the town.
And I do have concerns about that gap, because I do have concerns about if the town is not able to fund our budget, it feels like there are not a lot of places to make changes that would move that number from an 8.4 to something more tolerable, and then still have the ability to, meet things that pop up that we don't know are going to pop up, things.
Yeah, last year, the two of you and your entire administration did that heroic effort to drop 500,000 from the budget, and that was quite short-term, really fast turnaround. So hopefully we don't have to once again cut into important things to try to.
And my hope is we have worked very closely with our town partners, that they understand the gravity of the needs that we're seeing in our district. I am very thankful that the related services and therapist positions were restored back to the FY23 levels. I do appreciate that greatly, and I think that is meaningful to a lot of people in our community as well. So other than that,
the future of the budget.
The what?
The future.
Oh yes,
of the
that was
budget
the piece. See, when I talked-
It concerns me a little bit, because like I mentioned at our last joint meeting before the last joint meeting, the per pupil expenditures is like, we are in the bottom quartile of the state, and I appreciate what Dr. Kavanaugh said about how it's like kind of like right, without the sound effects. And
I like the sound effects.
Thank you. My son he does sound effects a lot, so I learned from him. But the state average is about 17,000. We're at about 14,400.
We're at 14,500.
So yeah, and the range, we're closer to the online high school than we are to our peers on the board. So I don't know that there's as many things in the budget that produces an ROI like the schools do, right? We are reducing crime, we are reducing unemployment, we are improving health, like this social worker in me, right? So, like, I appreciate what they're saying, but the school system is the reason that we have a growth in our community.
I agree with
Yeah.
with much of that. I do know that Mr. O'Leary discussed that last
Yeah,
night.
I listened
Yep,
to what
and I
he had to
know
say.
what his response would be is that he doesn't know if it's calculated the same in Hopkinton as it is in surrounding communities.
But the
that
state kind of
yeah,
calculates
it-
them all the same, and the state is saying.
Sure, but and I would love to have, the ability to put a higher per pupil
Yeah.
cost in.
Well, that's not, that has
But,
nothing to do
yeah,
with us.
but I think the benefits piece, if we had the ability to look at other districts and see if their per pupil cost is, 17,000 or 18,000, are they including the benefits with that? And I'm not saying that to counter what you're saying, I'm just,
No, I
I think
don't-
we'd have a better ability to make that argument to the town if we could absolutely tease that out. And
Sure.
the numbers you pull from the state database are not always as clear on how our friends do it. We could perhaps do a
Right.
backdoor investigation.
I mean,
with
I
fellow
love,
school-
I
school
love this
committee.
town and I love this school district, so I would always be arguing for our schools, right?
Well, I
Like,
think
that's
you
what
and
our
I
job
could
is.
vote, you and I could vote on the 45 positions rather than the.
Yeah, right.
So, I'm obviously the one who brought it up last meeting, right? Like, there is no question in my mind that we are making do. And, like, how do you get a school district to the level we have it when you compare to the other? So, one of the things I'm cutting myself off, but it's like, one of the comparison points we always do is surrounding school districts. That's not the proper comparison if we're talking about being, number 1 or number 3 in the state. Lexington is the appropriate comparison, right? Like, Southborough falls in there, Acton, right? Like, there's very specific school districts that we are actually comparing against, as opposed to Holliston, like, and when you look at, obviously, Lexington, the per pupil expenditure there is exceedingly high.
They're in the high 20s.
Right, and they've been the
Provincetown is
number
like
one.
39,000, something like that.
And
Right.
those towns are used as comps for other decisions. I mean, we do.
Right,
look,
right,
like,
right.
when we
But
were in
I'm saying,
negotiations,
but
we
I'm
did
saying
look
a
at
lot of
things like
times
that.
when we look at the charts, we're comparing
Yeah.
Westboro, which is a good town. We're comparing, Ashland, Holliston, but we're not comparing against the people that are at the top 5 in the list of school districts the way we are. And if we do that comparison, oh my God, we are per pupil like way below all.
So I
of
feel like that concerns, right?
No,
That's a
that's the
concern,
point,
yeah.
is that our administration, our teachers, like the entire system is doing an amazing job
Right.
with so much less per student than these other places. And sometimes I really worry about that tipping point.
Yeah, there's going
Not
to be a point
because
where
anyone,
right.
yeah, not because anyone does anything less, but simply because at some point the money only stretches so far, right? There was something you said that I wanted to follow up on, and I forgot.
It's probably gone from my head too, so. There was one other thing I want to say, and then
Please,
maybe
go
it'll
ahead.
come to you while I'm talking. The preschool director, it does not get talked about a whole lot in all of these conversations, but I do think that if I look at a preschool with 100 kids would typically have whether it's a public school or a community preschool, would have its own director. In the model that we're currently using, we're putting basically 3 grades in one school with one principal and one assistant principal, and not somebody who's dedicated to our youngest, really very vulnerable learners. So that I am in support of that preschool director position as well, even though I know a lot of the pieces that we're talking about typically have been the K to 5 and the 6 to 12 and what those pieces are.
I agree with you. I think the pre-K director is the one that out of the 3, I would support the most, just because I know what that looks like, I have multiple friends that work in there, and they're like, we need a director,
And again, I would like to, in my ideal mind, have been able to fund everything. But I think we have to look at the budget we have in front of us today and make a determination on what we have that's been presented, and move from there. And
Would you like a motion?
I would love a motion, unless Leah thought of.
I can't remember. There was something, but I got passionate about per student. Because I always do. Every time it comes
the
up.
back and forth. I know. It's,
Like, that's my sticking point right there.
I want to clarify, I'm not being contrary. I'm
No,
just
I
hearing.
totally get it. I just
Will you bring
that
nuance to the conversation?
made everything else go out of my head.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I just want to remind everyone that the dollar figure is just a little bit different from what is printed in your agenda.
Oh,
So
yeah.
the
Yes.
dollar figure you're looking at is the one on the slide right now.
60,172,752.
Well, did you already make a motion? Did I miss it?
I didn't,
Okay.
I'm logging back in.
So,
She
Got
said the
it.
word motion.
yeah, she got that far. And yeah, I mean, with respect to our town partners for whom this is way above their guidance, I think that, I think it's a sound ask, although bigger than what they wanted. So, and if you want to make that motion,
I'll be happy to make,
okay,
now
I'll
that I can
second.
read it. Okay. Move to approve the FY24 budget in the amount of $60,172,752.
Okay, there's a motion on the table by Amanda. Is there a second?
A second.
A second by Jen. Any discussion before we vote?
I'm not gonna vote for it. For the reasons I mentioned.
It's okay. All those in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Yeah, okay. So it is a 4-1 vote. It will be submitted tomorrow to the town manager's office. Thank you to everybody who has contributed to this discussion. So,
Thank you to all of you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate the viewpoint that you bring. And
Great.
All of the thoughtfulness, all the work, all the.
Everybody, every person on the committee, like, I appreciate.
And it will likely be back.
Yeah, I'm sure it
we
will.
will be back for more discussions on this,
yeah,
no
yeah.
doubt.
Tonight,
It is not the
I
last.
won't have missed it, maybe?
And the minutes that it was going.
Yeah.
So that brings us into our next item on the agenda, which is new business item B, which is the ESBC 2 grade configuration. We are a little bit behind schedule, but I do think this is a super important conversation too.
Okay, so I have the entire slideshow presentation that we've been using in various places. I don't want to bore you with some of the slides that I know you've seen many, many times, but I will move through it quickly. This slide here only shows you when we started to have a spike in our enrollment. And this slide here shows you Dr. Arthur Wagman's enrollment predictions, while this one shows you the MSBA. And I know we've said many times that they really run somewhat closely with each other. We had lots of grade level discussions, and so here's a slide that was put together for us by Perkins Eastman. And I think what the top bar is what we are currently living with. And then when you take a look at the next two bars, one shows you what a 2-3 school would look like, and the other one shows you what a 2-3-4 school would look like. I think for me, the interesting thing in terms of the blue bars, which represents Hopkins School, whether it's a 4.5 or a 6.7, is that if it's a 4.5, it's an 802 is the student enrollment. If it's a 6.56, it's 803. So those two numbers are just sort of the exact same number of children, really. When you start to see some kind of movement that's important is when you get to the high school, middle school numbers. If the middle school becomes a 7-8 school, you only have 795 students in a building that currently has 977, so you're freeing up a lot of space. And then you can see that the high school will go up to just under 1,500 students, or it's predicted that that will happen. So by freeing up that middle school space, you allow some migration really for kids at the high school to move into middle school space. This slide was also put together for us by Perkins Eastman. It's a slide that I liked very much. They tell us what the sort of as-planned enrollment is, and if you look at the asterisks under Marathon, the 662 is with the current addition that's going on of the 4 classrooms. So we're putting on 4 classrooms, and the enrollment is predicted to be 662. That's what it can accommodate, and our current enrollment is 661. Moving out several years, they predict that we will be at 779. So regardless of what happens, Marathon's going to need something. The Elmwood School as built is 650, current enrollment is 626, projected to go out to 774 in those 2 grade levels. Hopkins as built is 628, our current enrollment is at 640, so we are over enrolled for the current Hopkins school, projected to go out to 802. The middle school grades 6 to 8. As built enrollment is 1,116. Our current enrollment there is 977, so there's still a little bit of wiggle room. The projected enrollment is it will go up to about 1,200 students. The high school as built, 1,252. Our current enrollment is at 1,233, and you know we just put 6 stick-built classrooms on there, which is why we often say what we're doing and what we have been doing really just keeps us so that our head is above water. And the projected enrollment is to go out to 1,500 students in that building. So you can take a look at our projected overall space needs. This is kind of an interesting slide. If you, and Susan, I don't know if you want to talk to this one. I've been hearing my voice quite a bit, and you've talked about this one hundreds of times, I think.
Sure, I can
Okay.
speak to this.
Sure.
So you can see above the bar is if you are to build a 2-3, and you can see the orange area where the potential for additions to address that increased enrollment moving forward. So Marathon, you can see 2 orange areas. As a 2-3, you can see there is potential to actually add on to the existing Elmwood building, and that would be 42,000 square feet. For Hopkins, again, you would still need to add on, and for the middle school and the high school. So you can see where all those shaded areas are. Thank you, Bob. I apologize. When you go down to the Elmwood grade 2, 3, 4, what you see circled is another potential, which would be an additional study, and that would be for Marathon, whether it's a grade 2, 3 or a grade 2, 3, 4. A separate study about what you do if you pull the preschool out. So you can see above at keeping preschool there, it would still need an additional 23,000 square feet. If it becomes a K1, it would need 12,000 square feet. And what exactly that looks like for pre-K would really be a separate study. When you move to a 2 to 4, you will have to build all new. That is not something that can be accommodated just in a renovation addition to the existing Elmwood School. But interestingly, you can see that whether it's a 2-3 or a 2-3-4, Hopkins School still is in need of that additional gross square footage. Where it starts to free up some space is when you get to the middle school. If Hopkins becomes a 5-6, you have freed up space in the middle school as being only a 7-8, and you get that space that now becomes available for the high school. So you can see where that square footage changes a little bit, and you see that more in that next slide.
Can I talk to this just a second?
Sure, because you've sat through this many times as well.
Yeah, so one thing I want to make clear is, yes, we can add on to Elmwood, but children need to be moved. So the cost of the children not being in the classrooms that currently exist there has not been taken into account. The movement of the children out of Elmwood or out of particular classrooms in Elmwood so that you can build this piece. So that's something to keep in mind. I think that'll raise the cost of just renovating Elmwood.
Yeah. And I think something too that's helpful is if you look at this visual just in terms of the orange spaces, The greatest orange space in that bottom row is the replacement of an Elmwood school in a 2, 3, 4. But we have to remember that the MSBA reimbursement would cover grades 2, 3, and 4. So if you look at the middle school, high school, it really kind of minimizes the orange there, and that's where you get a lot of also cost savings.
Yep.
So it's a nice, easy visual.
I have a question. Has anybody talked about moving the pre-K into the middle school if we do a 2, 3, 4? Like, or before my son started, that's where it was. That's where he did his evaluation. And then it was moved to Elmwood, and now it's at Marathon. But if we're having like spatial issues within Marathon housing, just K to 1, and we do the 3-grade school, and it frees up a lot of space in the middle school, could that house the pre-K?
Yeah, and as I said, looking at what exactly to do with the preschool really would be a separate study.
Yeah, they're all like all over the place. These
Right.
little people moving around, but
Right.
like it
Because-
seems like there's an opportunity there. If there's like a block that says unused, like I have
Right.
some tiny people that would love to.
But it becomes unused, but it will be filled with high school.
Yeah, high schoolers. Yeah. That's. I mean, it's a. We're talking about space as it's like just space, maybe it's a possibility. That's what I thought, because
Yeah,
it was there previously, right? And then it moved.
Yeah, so when we free up the space in the middle school, it becomes accounted for as being used for the high school
For the
moving
high school,
forward.
so that kind of alleviates the issue in the high school.
Correct.
a bit.
Right, so if you look at the top there,
Yeah.
you'll see that the high school has an entire new wing in the front.
Sure, yeah.
And in the bottom, what happens is that
get a
little
little-
lip that's
they-
between
yeah,
the high
like a
school and the middle
breezeway
school.
or whatever.
At the top, it's part of the middle school.
Yeah.
Right.
So is there,
And the
it's
bottom
not
it
really
becomes part of
unused,
the-
it's really just housing.
Reallocated. As
Yeah,
opposed to-
okay. Thank you. I think I heard that, but maybe my brain didn't fully
No,
catch up.
it's kind of harsh
There's a
to.
lot going on here.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on.
Yeah,
Cool.
I think the word unused is confusing, like maybe vacated would be a better word to put in that slide. We've heard it so many times that it
Yeah.
doesn't dawn on us
We know
as.
what it means.
Thank you.
That's
Yeah,
a good
I
point.
appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
So this next slide really just sums it up. If you were to do a 2-3, you would still need an additional 108,000 gross square footage across the district. If you were to do a 2-3-4, you would still need 68,000 gross square foot. But again, with that 2-4, you get that funding from the MSBA. So you do get that extra, and it reduces the amount of square feet that you need to add that is not MSBA funded to those other schools.
So what you're gonna see on these next slides are really just visuals that will help you to see where the potential additions would be going. I can skip through those.
Well, oh, no, it's fine. So this is without the pre-K moving, as it is now. This is what we would have to build onto Marathon.
That's Hopkins regardless of whether it's 4-5 or 5-6, whether they're 802 or 803 kids. That's what we need. Here is if the middle school remains at grades 6 to 8. Here is if the middle school transitions to a 7-8. Here is the high school if it is a grade 9 to 12 with a 7-8 middle school. And you know, we continue to talk about linking those buildings. And there's the high school, 9 to 12, if the middle school is a 6 to 8 school.
Right, so here's where it gets really weird. Like, there's still the addition between them. It's
Yeah.
just on the
It's on
middle
different
schools
ones, yeah.
filling it in now. Yeah. It's a very odd.
It's weird that it switches schools depending on how, yeah. It makes it a little confusing, but either way, there's a connector.
Yep.
That makes sense, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yes,
just a
yes.
question on the middle school. I know that the original component of the middle school is our oldest school building, and then we have newer components of the middle school that are not as old. Has there been any conversation about any concerns about building our long-term strategy on the old core? Is the old core a good core to build on?
So and I believe it is 30%, but when you are adding 30% of the asset value to a building, you are required for code upgrades. So we would end up doing a lot of renovation to the older building, if you will. Yes, so it would all be brought up to code, current code. So it would look very different than how it does now, and that would be required.
So, yeah, so like ADA stuff would suddenly become required in some of the older buildings, which in some ways is kind of nice. It's going to cost us money though. But having the accessibility component
Right, absolutely.
is nice.
Yeah, and even in terms of sort of bottlenecking, like safety issues, you know, there's plans to enlarge hallways, because right now, those hallways can become very congested, and I see it as a safety issue.
Like taking the lockers out. They were talking about taking the lockers out in some places, or
Right.
moving the lockers. Yeah, I appreciate that, because it is. We talk about Elmwood at end of life. It's really our second oldest school, and so I know that there's got to be some investment to the core of the middle school through this. So that's good to know.
All right. Do you want to do this one? You've heard it 100 times.
Sure. So what they, Perkins Eastman did was create this visual, if you will, the green, yellow, and red, and basically indicating when the student enrollment and the capacity within the building is increasing over the years. When you're at green, your enrollment is within 10% of your target class size, and then when you get into yellow, it is between 10 and 20%. So that's adding more than 2 students per classroom and or repurposing spaces. And when you get into the red, now you are over 20% of your target, and that's where you get into the additional space required. So this chart represents your current configuration, and so you can see when each building is getting into the red.
And just so you know what target class sizes are, it's 15 at the pre-K, and 18 in K, 22 grades 1 to 6, and 23 grades 7 to 12.
Another thing to take into account is this is talking about class sizes. It doesn't really take into account the common areas.
Yes, thank you for saying
Right,
that.
so we add a modular, now we have enough class sizes, so it would be like Marathon or Elmwood or whatever would be green, but that doesn't mean the cafeteria can really handle it well.
And I didn't realize until they did the capacity presentation that we have to add like additional physical education space. You know, so like it's another half gym or something at Hopkins, and just because of enrollment numbers.
That's a weird thing to think about, too.
It is.
Like, how do you add a half a gym?
Yeah, I think it was a half.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we did
Strange.
say
But
that.
it also makes it clear, like, we're doing the addition to Marathon, within a year, we're back in yellow,
Yeah, that is correct.
right? Like,
Right.
that's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
So I'm just picking up on that. So the marathon, even with the addition that we're putting on now, ends up in the red regardless.
Oh, that is correct, yes.
Yes.
And that's we're not counting pre-K in any of these, right? This is without pre-K in the
This
number?
is with pre-K.
With-
This
Oh,
is,
this is with
this is
pre-K.
your
Okay.
current configuration.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So
Because sometimes they're there and sometimes they're not.
Or pre-K.
Yeah.
Yes.
just illuminating looking at all these numbers and then thinking about the 750 MBTA related multifamily
No,
units
yeah,
that could
when
potentially
I
be
saw
added.
that, I was like, oh, that's gonna be
I
interesting.
digress, I'm sorry.
So if you don't know, the MBTA, so for any adjacent community to a place that has a commuter rail stop, they are requiring a certain number of high-density
High-density housing.
housing to go up. And Hopkinton is considered
The vast
adjacent,
majority.
and so they have said that we need 750 high-density units.
I feel like we have that.
So that
I asked that same
Being
thing.
a little facetious, but I do feel like we have that.
So there's regulations around it. So
And location,
It's,
yes,
yes,
yeah.
so it's the Southborough train station
Right.
that makes Hopkinton fall into the requirement. So the high density needs to be within a half mile
Walking
of
distance.
the train station. There was a presentation done by the town that shows the land that is within that half-mile proximity. So it's challenging to
Mostly
get
state park, right?
that amount of housing in the land that is available. The other requirement is if it is outside of the half mile, it has to be walkable. And that's up and down Cedar Street, which currently is not walkable
walkable.
beyond that half mile. So
Right.
there are challenges
Yeah.
to get that in, so that it's not coming tomorrow. But we have to, you have to zone for it.
I appreciate the spirit of that, but it seems like with planning for the schools, that's not something that probably was included in any of our projections or
This is
any
a
of this.
brand new regulation.
So that's
Brand
so that's
new,
interesting.
Yeah.
And
probably-
you can bet that a very high percentage of those are probably going to be families,
Families,
because
right.
they want to bring
Of
their
course,
kids to Hopkinton. So
High
having
density,
affordable,
yeah, living within walking distance to public transportation. Like,
Right.
that's beautiful, but also challenging, right?
So the proximity to Ashland does not meet,
Not within a
Anything.
half mile.
We're far
but it's
enough
quite
away.
walkable.
Oh, yeah.
But that's, so apparently it's the Southborough one that pulls Hopkinton in.
That's
The
interesting. It must
line
be
is
just
Because-
very
that.
close to the
because
train station.
probably because Ashland has that ingest
It's a little further over the
road.
border, too.
They have that ingest road, right? So they're really actually really far into that turnoff.
Yeah.
So it's not directly there.
Right.
The distance from there to the border of Hopkinton is a little bit more than,
Yeah.
All right, sorry, I didn't mean to.
Sorry, yeah,
Tangent.
we totally
That
went.
is interesting
No, it's a good
information
conversation.
and also concerning information.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, was the state, thank you. I've never
So
said that
this
before.
next slide shows you what it would look like if you build a 2-3 school. So you can see that for 2-3, you are in the green, and you are in the green for a very long time. I think it takes you out to 2032, you're still in the green. But that leaves us with red at Marathon and Hopkins and middle school and high school. And so then what they show you is if you build a 2-3-4, and this is without doing anything to Marathon, without doing anything to Hopkins, without doing anything to the high school, your
Middle school.
middle school and the new 2-3-4 Elmwood replacement are both in green for a very long period of time. So I do like these sort of stoplight graphs is what they sometimes call them. I think that they're helpful for us to look at.
So I'm going to ask for a little pause because Mr. Lebrod went upstairs and the elevator is now not working and the stairs are locked.
Oh, do you want me to go let
So
him in?
he can't get back down here.
He needs somebody to
We
let
can
him in.
go
We
open
can
the
open it
door.
over.
So we need to kind of
Let him in.
probably
We can do
have
that.
one at each end though, I
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
All right.
so it doesn't lock on anybody.
think. Right.
So,
that's-
Is that on purpose?
Was it something he said?
This way, this way, this way.
something we said.
The people watching on HCAM right now are probably
Wondering what's going on. The one piece of kind
Yeah, I
of
was gonna say-
comment on we've talked about this in prior meetings about if the preschool came out of Marathon. And if, like, for example, either with a new building or with some repurposed Elmwood or someplace else, I know that opens up space with looking at the red.
Yeah.
The red color just kind of.
It does.
It opens up space, it just it still goes red. It just needs a smaller addition
Marathon,
to Marathon,
even if the preschool comes out.
even with
still.
preschool out.
Yes,
I
this
really,
slide right here helps you with that one.
I really like the project slide. You didn't include it in this, like where he shows kind of how you can like work
Stage it.
stage it. Yeah, that was really good.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we're trying to really kind of focus on your vote that you
Yeah,
need to
yeah,
make
yeah.
on the grade configuration. There's a lot of fun stuff on the whole
Yeah.
process of the district-wide study.
Well, but it also made a point about how quickly you could get to certain things, right? So the project plan kind of helped with the 2-3, 2-3-4 to kind of see how quickly.
Right here.
Started in the pandemic when we all became experts in
rescue.
HVAC.
Well,
We're all
yes.
experts in something else now.
Yeah.
It's good.
So,
We need to stand up.
I don't know, you probably covered this while I had to step out, but we are voting on this on February 2nd. in fact, right, piece of
Yeah.
cake.
We did not
And
talk about
And we have to vote on it
We have to,
February
right.
2nd,
Do we have
because that's
another
already
listening
pushing it
session
up.
between now and then? Or is?
there's I'm sorry, did you say the forum?
Or a hearing or.
There's a forum on January 24th on the Elmwood project.
Okay,
So, yeah, there's been a.
great, thank you.
And some of these slides we put in here because we've used them with the teachers. One of their questions was, what's it going to look like if you have a very large school? And I mean, I guess it's relevant to this conversation because when you're thinking about a 2, 3, 4 school, you're talking about a very large elementary school in the state of Massachusetts. And so we had Perkins Eastman have a conversation with us about, what would that building actually look like? And then how do you design something that is really warm and welcoming and safe and creates those neighborhoods of learning so that even if you're an 8-year-old in that building, you have a sense of, like, this is my little neighborhood and I feel like I'm part of something that's comfortable, as opposed to I'm in this great big place and it's like, hello.
That is one of the things I've really liked about their designs. Like I was saying on Tuesday, one of their designs reminds me of being like a home, right? Like your media center, your auditorium, your cafeteria are all when you walk in. So all the public spaces, all the places parents go to, everything's there.
Nice.
And then the places that are for the kids, the kind of like, your home, your bedroom areas and all of that are separated out and they're private, right? And I really kind of like that thoughtfulness in the.
I'm just laughing at Mr. LeBrod, actually.
Oh, but I'm glad this came up as a. That's good. Don't believe that was on the agenda.
We might add it though now, just like.
But yeah, but so for me, that's part of like what I'm really liking about their designs is that kind of private, warm space that is just for the kids that, and not everyone walks into, right? And all the other stuff is just so easily accessible when you walk in that you don't need to go back there.
There were questions about are there other schools of this size across the state? And of course, that data exists. So when you look at those top ones, for example, Brook Charter School, and I know you can't see that, 45 kids under one roof, so there are elementary school age children in that building. But as you go down that list, when you look at some of the Methuen schools or Bridgewater Raynham, you can see that there's a 1,200 student pre-K to 3 building. And so so when people have concerns about how will we get 32 buses to, or what would probably be more than 32 buses to, kind of queue up and get all of those very young children out and get them into the building and into their classrooms in an expedient and timely manner. At the end of the day, how will dismissal look? We know that it is actually being done in other schools across the Commonwealth. So it's through that door. And now we have multiple points of entrance for our kids because it has just been a much more streamlined process and gets kids into and out of the building far more seamlessly.
Right, it doesn't affect traffic either. Like they made that change in the middle of my daughter's first grade year and it was amazing how much like that simple tweak changed everything. And people seemed less angry, which probably was nice for everybody. Like in the building.
I mean, I think one of the things that's unique for us is the way most school districts separate things out is by having different full elementary schools, right? That then feed into a middle school, that then feeds into the high school. So it's probably very hard to find comparables.
It is.
Because of that fact, right? Because we're not looking at other school districts that have very similar configurations.
Right. Exactly. And when we were doing the research for the educational plan, one of the things that kept coming up is if you have, say, 3 elementary schools that end at grade 5, and they're kind of calling it a spoke and wheel configuration, when all of those kids who are rising into 6th grade get there at once, it's a little bit traumatic for the 6th graders who are in a new place, but also with much older peers. So I think that there is something nice about our campuses. This is all of the research that we had done. I know that you've all seen this before about the social and physical development of kids in grades 2-3 and 2-3-4 and 5-6 and 7-8, because you know that you'll have a down the road domino effect. And then we talked about academics for kids in grades 2-3 and 2-3 and 4, and then the same for 5-6 and 7-8 if we were to look at something along the lines of a lower and upper middle school model. So when we took all of the efficiencies, we looked at things like busing efficiency, traffic mitigation. As much as it's hard for people to believe, I think our traffic engineer has said that there are ways to actually reduce the traffic on Hayden Row if we think about the way, and maybe even crosstown traffic, if we think about the way we're configuring the campuses. We would be moving Hopkins, if it were a 5-6 school, to 8 o'clock start time, which would free up afternoons for those kids. Running parallel schools would be developmentally appropriate if you had a 5-6 and a 7-8. The cost sharing for 3 grades rather than 2 with the MSBA would be significant. We would be taking a look at our K-5 shared personnel and specialists, and they would all be on one campus, which would really be a benefit to the community, to the school community. Allowing grade 8 students perhaps to access some advanced high school courses if they were developmentally and academically ready to do that. Taking a look at our physical plants, designing other physical plants, the 5-12, to meet specific programmatic needs. So it's an opportunity for us to say, okay, if Hopkins becomes a 5-6 school, what would we want for the programming in there for kids at that particular grade level? Sustainability, we talk all the time about, and Lee, I know you're talking about geothermal earlier, about how does all of the green school preparation keep with our community's values, and then just extracurricular activities too that might better need our students. So I will let you, Mrs. Rodman, talk about our system-wide order of magnitude in terms of cost.
Correct. So this slide breaks it down in terms of cost, looking at the whole campus-wide needs. The top grid is if you were to do a grade 2-3, the estimate for a new Elmwood at 2-3 being $127,000, the additions to grade 4-5 at $46,000, additions to Marathon at $29,000, high school at $57,000, and a grade 6 through 8 at $65,000. So the total doing a 2-3 is $327 million over time. The estimated total potential reimbursement from the MSBA, and this is the effective reimbursement, and again, it's estimated, would then bring the cost down to between $302 or $295 million. If we are able to do a 2-3-4 school, you can see the cost for Elmwood goes up. But the estimated reimbursement also goes up. So at the end, your costs actually go down. And this is where doing that 2-3-4, adding in the MSBA reimbursement for a 3rd grade as opposed to just a 2nd grade, saves the town of Hopkinton about $15 million in looking at our long-term plan.
And that's what we brought you. If there's other data that you would like to see going forward, we're happy to bring you that as well.
So one thing I'd love to, because I say this anecdotally all the time, but I would love to actually get real information from Dr. Zaleski. When my child was young and he had ADHD, I was told very specifically that the transition to 4th grade is usually the hardest point, because that is when they start to have to really use more cognitive abilities. It's a lot more difficult. And so I've been thinking about the fact that here we have a child who may have that kind of difficulty. Not only are they transitioning to 4th grade, but they're dealing with a giant transition to a new school, right? So we are adding this difficulty on top of an already difficult transition, if I'm right. Like I said, I would love to get the real understanding on that. And in a 2-3-4 school, that child would remain in a comfortable environment where they know everybody as they're going through that first hard transition into the higher cognitive load grade. So like, I don't know, I just find that like a little point on top of all these other points that seems like a good thing.
Yeah, we've had that conversation about, in the building principals at the elementary level will say, every single year, 50% of my building is new. And
Right.
it might be nice to just get to know a family or a child for even one more year. It would be important. And I think too, executive functioning comes in pretty profoundly at grade 4, kind of keeping it all together. It's tricky.
Dr. Kavanaugh, I wonder if before the second, you could share some thoughts on how you would approach the transition for this. It would be a big transition. I personally love all the benefits. It'd be the fiscally responsible choice to go to 2 to 4. I would have loved to have kept my 6th grade sons in with 5th grade. I think that 6th grade is a very young age to go with 8th graders. I love the idea of the 5-6. I think the bringing the 4th graders in to delay that transition till you're just 1 year older, I think makes total sense. I love the idea of different extracurriculars, and I mean, there's so much opportunity, I think. But it's a huge transition for the staff, so I'd be curious to know, I mean, obviously you wouldn't have it all like inked out, but generally speaking, how early can we start building that transition, and what might that look like, so that we can, build those communities well in advance of when the school is done, so that we're ready to go. I'm sure you're already thinking about it. I'd love to hear some thoughts before we vote, if that's okay.
Sure.
It's a really good point. The staff, as we know, a lot of them have worked together for how long in Hopkins, and so you would have a transition to them suddenly grouped with the Elmwood staff, and of course they all know each other, but it's different to be in the building together all the time, working together. So yeah.
I would imagine from like a social emotional development standpoint that keeping our kids like younger, as it kind of does, would reduce like bullying and harassment and that kind of thing, just because you're not being forced, and like our little guys aren't being forced in a building with big guys and having to do that quick growing up piece that sometimes comes with being around bigger kids. So and I wonder, like, obviously there's probably no data that exists on that piece, but I would imagine, like, just based on what I know about kids' development, that would probably be the case, which would be a big bonus from my perspective.
I am so sold on this. The only piece that you just brought up is that I think that it's going to be very emotional for the staff and the administrators, the principals and assistant principals, who are going to not lose, but they'll gain another set of staff, but they're going to lose half their staff. Mm-hmm. So I think that that's going to be the tricky thing. The rest of it, as you pointed out, Amanda, I mean, you look at it and you're like, this is kind of a no-brainer, but the people side is so important, I think, and I have every confidence that you're going to manage the transition for the staff, in a way that makes it as painless as possible. But it is that one piece that I know, and we have received communications from some teachers who have expressed that concern too, and so I just want to make sure they know that we hear it, and I certainly can appreciate how it would change if I were ripped out of my building. With a grade configuration change. So I hear that side of things, but it's also, an opportunity to do some potentially really cool things, right. Especially for the staff that are switching buildings. So, even though it feels like, we have 5 years to let this, think about this and let us consume us, it also is an opportunity to do something different for some of the staff that, you do the same thing for 15 years, maybe you do want to try some slightly different angle.
If this was, is there anything that you would want as a teacher that would potentially be moving and changing? Like, what would help you
I guess I don't know. I mean, off the top of my head, I don't know how I would approach this, but I think it's just, building those relationships between, like you said, you've been in the same building, you know the people.
Yeah.
And so how do you foster, they know many of the other teachers, but
Yeah.
just trying to foster, like, all right, now we're going to have this new community of teachers and a new group of faculty, and, and I don't know how you do throw parties. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you do it. But yeah, exactly. Like, how do you get folks to be like, okay, you're going to be right next door, you're not moving
It feels
50
bigger,
miles
probably.
away. It just feels that way, and I understand that it feels
That was my
way.
biggest concern as
Yeah.
well, and I'm interested in that, like, how it will be managed.
I actually have less concern about that, given the amount of time that we have and the amount of ability we have to work to make that transition as seamless as we can, or as comfortable as we can to help. I for sure, there's going to be some feelings that people have about moving from one building to another, but I do feel like that is, for me, a smaller piece. The piece that I think is important to flush out, and probably won't be flushed out entirely between now and when we vote on February 2nd, but is a concern that I hear just in terms of how the fifth grade teachers are concerned about, are they going to continue where their current model of teaching, where they're teaching, two teachers working together with the same group of kids, where one teacher's doing like math and science and one's doing English and social studies, whereas when they get to the sixth grade, the math teachers are doing all math, the English teachers doing all English, et cetera. And I know that there was some concern from both ends, both the middle school teachers and the Hopkins teachers, of teachers not necessarily wanting to switch the model that they trained and
it works.
It works with those kids. And how do we find an identity for a school as a 5-6 school while still being able to meet the needs of individual different grades where they're at? I feel like that's a solvable problem, but I do want to make sure that that's something that we keep on our radar as we're moving forward. The other thing is, I know transportation at the lower grades, this seems like it's a huge win in terms of being able to make the routes a little different. But I do know that there are people who have expressed concerns about a 5 to 12 bus, even though as a parent of a 12th grader, I know there are not as many of those older students on the buses. A lot of people, once they get to having to pay the bus fees, make alternate arrangements rather than having to pay the bus fees.
There's very few conversations that happen with the high school students on those buses.
Well, yes, I
headphones on.
But I think we just want to make sure that we have that ongoing conversation.
Yes, agreed.
The benefits of the fiscal piece, particularly, in terms of our ability to not just build a 2, 3, 4 school, but to still have money to address the needs in the district, are so huge. It's hard to not look at those and to be wowed by those. And I think also some of the other points about keeping, the fourth grade with the Elmwood cohort, there are a lot of things that are attractive about that. I think back to, it came up last year when you're talking about the fourth grade. I feel like when we were having a discussion about IEPs, there was an increase, it seemed like, hitting fourth grade on kids who go on to IEPs.
Exactly. And that's where I was thinking, like, the transition between schools, and that year it was even worse because we were dealing with COVID, and they hadn't even really been to school at their old school for more than a year-ish before they started to transition to the new school. Like, it was, yeah.
And now it's going to be 3 and 3, really, pre-K 1,
right?
Or pre-K K 1, and then 2, 3, 4,
Right.
and then so there's 3 years and 3 years. So in a way, it seems longer now.
It does, and it would seem like that 3-year span in there would offer more opportunities for like leadership for the fourth graders to work with the second graders and some kind of mentoring opportunity, but also cohorts for things like special education or things that we were not able to do in the same way in a 2-grade school, that potentially there might be a targeted program that could be put in that would help more grades of kids. Would be something worth exploring. I know many years ago, when we had discussed putting a K-5 school in, which was not ultimately what the town wanted to do, but that was one of the pieces that had been brought forward about that, was the ability to cohort some of our special education programs within the building.
And just, I mean, one other thing too is you look at the Elmwood designs and it's like, okay, maybe there would, everyone's moving to the new school, right? So even people who have worked together in Elmwood are moving to a new space
Right.
completely
We're still
with new things. So it's still new to everybody. So maybe that would help, and it might be exciting because all of the stuff that they're building around it and all of the they're building like, what were they calling them? The water gardens? What were they calling them?
I'll have to look at the designs.
About right.
Something
Yeah.
garden. Is it water gardens?
There are water gardens.
Yeah,
Garden.
like, water features that kids can
That's
awesome.
play with, and like, those are all being built into the campus. So like, it gives the teachers opportunity to do new things with their kids. So maybe that would help.
It's always nice to have a new, brand spanking new classroom as a teacher. How often does that happen? Almost never. So you're like, no one's ever been in this room before. Yeah.
One of the things Mrs. DeBow said is, like, kind of crazy as it sounds. I mean, how many years did we talk about center school and how decrepit and how it just didn't serve educationally? But she said when everyone was leaving, there was like this real sense of you were leaving something so important that there was loss in your heart. And I think, Mr. LeBrod and I both talked about that. We've worked in different districts, and even when you're making a decision to leave because you're going somewhere where you're being promoted to a new job and it's exciting, but still leaving a place it's very sad.
Yeah.
I was such a dweeb that when it used to be summertime and I was a teacher,
Oh, yeah.
in
Just
June,
crying.
I'd be sobbing on the way out of the parking lot. I'd be like, what am I doing? I'm coming back in 10 weeks.
I know. I didn't.
But
See?
just a change in
But
your
some
life,
people do.
it's
Yeah.
emotional.
I would think that now that the teachers have been at Marathon and appreciated the environment Marathon offers, it might be something for them to look back. I don't know if Mr. LeBrod has had the opportunity to tour the former summer school, center school.
I haven't had the privilege yet, but I do look forward to
There are quite a few.
I don't think anyone's allowed in the building
Yeah,
anymore.
I think that
I guess there might be some
hard
issues.
hat
But
zone.
I also think that it would be important to ask teachers what they, what would help them make that transition if
Yeah.
that's in fact how we vote.
Yeah.
right. It's a hard thing to answer.
Yeah, but
You know, we have
might
5 years
like
to work it
focus
out.
groups
Yeah.
to talk about, or I don't know
Yeah.
that where they can.
I like the conversation though, but it's like hard to define what your heart will want.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, but some brainstorming maybe.
All right.
All right, thank you. I think I'm going to get very low marks this month for the ability to keep the meeting on the appropriate time schedule.
That's
You
not
know
your
what?
fault.
I'm not going to give you negative marks because I think all of the conversations needed to happen and the space needed to be made for people to express their thoughts. And I think you did a great job allowing all of that. So
I always give you high marks, Nancy.
Well, you guys are just being kind to me, so
No, you deserve all the kindness.
we make the
I mean,
good
you're okay.
Jen had to make it.
She can be on, because now that she said she's not running again, she can be totally honest.
I haven't run any meetings on time during the pandemic, so you're better than me.
Okay, so we have the Special Education Reserve Fund, Dr. Kaplan.
Sure. So Mrs. Rothermick and I met with the town manager and Mr. O'Leary this morning. We had a conversation about the Special Education Reserve Fund, and as you know, if you have that fund, both the school committee and the Board of Selectmen will need to vote to allow us to spend that money. So that's really what we are asking for tonight, is for you to vote to expend that appropriation. At this point in time, we believe that we'll end up spending it all. I know that, it would be nice if we didn't have to do that. But in looking at Dr. Zaleski's out-of-district numbers for next year, it appears for the very first time ever, we will probably go over 40 students. So the number is in fact climbing. You should know that.
Is it?
And that's not
in
impacted
relation-
by
no,
this,
but
but
is that
this isn't
in
impacted by
relation to
that.
the growth of the district? I'm trying to think.
Percentage-wise?
Percent-
right?
Yeah, or
percentage-wise.
are there particular
I think
move-ins
it's
that are
changing
just?
profiles, yes,
Okay.
that's right, yeah.
Okay.
But there are move-ins.
Okay.
Yes, yep.
So are there any questions, or is there somebody who would like to make a motion, or?
move to approve the expenditure of the Special Education Reserve Fund for FY 2023 in the amount of I think that's
The
supposed to be
comma's in the wrong spot.
1,000,000.
Yes.
This is $94,024.
Okay, motion by Leah, is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Holly, all those in favor?
Yes.
Aye. Any opposed? It's unanimous and so passes. Thank you for that, and that brings us into item D, which is the Accept Collaborative with Westboro.
Sure. So as you know, we're a member of the Accept Collaborative, and I included in your packet are, the ways in which people move into collaboratives. So Amber Bach, the superintendent over in the Westboro Public Schools, has petitioned Accept to be part of the collaborative. And so each one of the school committees and the member districts does need to vote to approve moving Westboro in. I don't really see that there's a downside to that. I mean, it's always nice to have another member. One issue might be that transportation right now at Accept is a little bit tricky because there are so few vans and so few drivers and so many districts, that spreading that a little bit thinner might be a concern, but it's always nice to have more people contributing too. So in the idea that, like, one of the things Accept provides is professional development. And so if the more people partaking, that's more revenue for the collaborative. So that's actually a nice end of things.
Do we anticipate a significant impact on our transportation ability to get Accept to transport our kids?
Already,
plan for
there are
them to-
issues with
I
Accept
know.
transporting our kids, and, I had a finance meeting with them this morning, and I'm on the finance subcommittee, but the transportation subcommittee was meeting in the afternoon, and it really has become so challenging for them to provide transportation services to all the member districts, and some use it and some don't. Framingham used to be a user of the transportation, then they backed out and decided to do something on their own, so they don't contribute to it any longer. But I think Accept is going to have to overhaul transportation completely. So I don't necessarily know that Westboro's admission into Accept impacts
Okay.
things either way.
Okay, thank you.
And I do know that all of the districts that have in fact had a vote so far have voted affirmatively to allow them in.
Okay.
I don't want to sway you, but
I
I
know,
would say that.
no, I just was
Just so you
curious
know.
about the,
Yeah.
Can't go against the crowd.
Right? Oh, no, you can certainly go against the crowd.
Sorry, I'm a
any
little tired.
questions on that? Or any motions that people feel moved to make?
I'll move to approve Westboro's application to join Accept Education Collaborative.
Okay, motion by Holly, is there a second?
Sure, I'll second.
Second by Jen, all those in favor?
Yes. Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so that is unanimous and so passes. Welcome aboard to Westboro. That brings us into old business, item A, which is the 2022 annual town report. I may have said that in a mixed up way. So this is a piece that is due at the end of this month. So if we were not on a deadline, I would probably have suggested that we kick this off again, but I would like just some feedback. I know there was at
I
least
thought
one
you did a
typo.
fabulous job. I think there's a singular building that should be buildings. And
Which paragraph?
It is the second paragraph, third line from the bottom. Increase the capacity needs in all of our
Yep,
buildings.
good work. I see that, thank you.
But I thought you did a nice job of summarizing the work we do. Thank you for doing it.
Thank you. It does feel like there are so many things that it's hard to capture in terms of what we do that are not
Yeah.
able to, in a report with a limited length on it.
I thought that was well written, wonderful. Some of this I was not a part of, maybe I didn't know. Now I know a lot more. I appreciate that.
It's odd that it's a calendar year.
Yeah.
We don't
Yeah.
function
It's
on the
bizarre.
calendar year, so it's jarring when you're gonna write it. It's
Yeah.
jarring to read it.
Like, I'm confused.
Right.
But then I remembered that I should be confused, so.
It is, and when we look at like number of kids in the district, and we look at what our budget was, it goes by the fiscal year, and
Yeah.
that's a little challenging to try to
It must have
convert
been
to
very
count.
difficult to write. Like,
I mean, it wasn't terrible because what I did to kind of jog my memory was to go back through our agendas
Yeah.
and look from January through December. That's where I got the counts for the meeting, how many times we met and stuff like that. But
but it was very succinct and well written, so, thank you.
So the only thing that isn't in here that was it financial aid policy fiscal?
I think we put it in here. I think
Is it somewhere
I think
else?
Nancy put it in here.
I You know what, I thought I listed it under policies.
I thought you did too, let's see.
Maybe I'm just not, because in that one paragraph, I don't see
Oh, no, I
it.
think you're right.
No, I think
That
you're
might
right,
be-
that was an inadvertent oversight. I think I hit, when I've read it so many times myself.
You saw
Now
it.
that it was in my head, I think, and was not realizing I had missed it in that section. That I had intended to put in
Okay.
that section that starts with during 2022.
Yeah, no, I think that's the one big policy that I would add, because I think that was a very thoughtful thing to do for the families.
I do, and I think it's ongoing. My recollection is we didn't actually modify the entire policy, but just the threshold for
Right,
this
and
year.
then we wanted to see what would
Yep.
happen
And so-
and get data. Yeah.
Do you guys trust me enough to
Yeah.
construct the sentence? Because I can't put it together right now.
Yeah.
But to include that, and to
Yes.
include that we're going
Yes.
to be bringing that back to look at again after we have some data
Yeah.
from this year.
Right.
And are we supposed to vote on it, or just?
I would love a vote, because I'm going to put your name on it.
I vote to approve the 2022 Annual Town Report Summary as amended.
Thank you. So motion by Leah, is there a second?
Second. Oh, go ahead, Holly. Give it to Holly.
I don't even.
Okay, a second by Holly.
It's almost 10.
All those in favor?
Yes.
Okay, and I am an
Thank you
aye,
for
so
doing
that so passes, and we can check that off for 2022.
Thank you.
That brings us into future agenda items. We do have a few still kind of, now that we've gotten through budget, that we are going to circle back to that have been brought up. Are there any ones that we have not kind of flagged as something we'd like to bring that people would like to throw out now, or email Amanda or Dr. Kavanaugh or I?
The only thing might be what you brought up earlier is considering reconfiguring liaison roles so that someone who
yeah.
is going
Oh,
to be
yeah.
here longer term
Yeah.
might, I don't know if that needs to be
Yeah.
an agenda item or if that can be done offline,
Yep.
but yeah, something to,
Succession.
okay, yes, good word.
All right, so we have time to think about that when it's, our brains are a little
Yes.
fresh.
Right,
Yeah,
right, right.
exactly.
That's great. Then that brings us into items by consensus.
Okay, as superintendent, I recommend the school committee approve the items by consensus as outlined in your agenda.
So moved.
Motion by Leah, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Jen. All those in favor?
Yes.
Aye, and that is unanimous and passes. And then I would, if anybody is interested, I would seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Jen, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Holly. All those in favor?
Yes.
Aye, and that adjourns us at 9:47. Thank you all who have tuned in and for who were here in the studio. Our next meeting is February 2nd. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I feel like it's like